Okay, if you can take your seat, we're going to resume. Okay, welcome back to you all in the room, and welcome back to our online audience as well. So we are now going to go into artificial intelligence. And before we go to the panel discussion, it is my pleasure to introduce Maria de Klein-Lloyd. You are Senior Vice President in charge of analytical services at Elsevier. You worked with McKinsey, I think, before, with the Dutch government, but you're here today to speak about this.
Yes.
Right? A report that Elsevier recently published on artificial intelligence, how knowledge is created, transferred, and used. You have a short description on a postcard on your seat. I also want to take this opportunity to very much thank Elsevier for your support in the organization of today's conference. We're delighted to have you here. And Maria, I'll let you present the report right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. So, artificial intelligence, how knowledge is created, transferred, and used. Does this thing work? Where do I point it to? Yeah. Yes. So I would like to start with a quick reflection of what AI is before we dive into trends, because it's important to know what we're talking about. Then I'll share with you some of the trends we found in our report, looking at China, the US, and Europe. And lastly, the important topic of ethics in AI. So why are we talking about artificial intelligence today? It is a transformative power in our society, with a chance of changes to how we work, changes to our economy. And a lot of governments are realizing this, are writing national policies, regional policies. And if you read them, they all follow a logic where they say, we need to educate people on AI. We need to make sure there's research on AI. That research needs to turn into innovations that have an economic benefit. And because of this big transformative power, we need to make sure we have a societal debate on what good AI is and what a good outcome of this transformation for society is. And then you quickly run into one problem, that already the experts agree that there is no common definition of AI. So anyone saying Europe is better at this than the US, what are they basing that on? Do they have the same view of what AI is? We did a semantic check, and one of the things we saw is these four sectors that you see here use very different words to describe AI and focus on different things. And that's when we realized that we as Elsevier could make a difference. Because we have data, technology, technologists, and a network in the academic sector to make a difference. So what we did, I'll skip that. Yeah. This clicker is interesting, but you'll have time to read the sheet. Why is this clicker not doing it? Yes. Oh, other way. Come on. Yeah. Is there a way to fix a clicker? Or am I pointing it the wrong way? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
No. that way. No. It's doing something. Yeah, because it's going back. Why is it going? Can I ask to move it forward by 2? That work?
What is it?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So we actually used AI to define AI. We mined keywords from patterns, from media, from research, from textbooks. We found almost 800 words that matter on AI, and we used that to find a broad set of scientific papers that could be about AI. And then we trained an algorithm to distinguish which ones were really about AI and which weren't. Why does that matter? Because AI is turning into a general purpose technology, which means there will be papers on AI that don't mention the word AI and are published in medical journals or in agriculture journals. So this question, which of these is an AI paper, is not trivial. So we zoomed it down, we ended up with 600,000 documents, and of those 600,000, we applied an auto-clustering, that's more machine learning for you, to actually cluster this in 7 topics. Because then you can say, this geography is focusing on this, and that geography is focusing on that. And now we suddenly had a base on which we could actually make comparisons. If you could skip 1 forward, please. So that allowed us to actually talk about trends. If you could go 1 further. We can do this because the core database we used, Scopus, has peer-reviewed scientific abstracts of peer-reviewed literature. But in Scopus, every article, be it a conference paper or a journal article, has an author and is affiliated to an institution or multiple. So then you can say, that paper came from China. Next one, please. One of the staggering things of AI is the growth in scientific output. So over the last 20 years, average scientific output grows by about 1% per year, AI by 5% over 20 years, and 12% per year in the last 5 years. That's amazing. Next one, please. If you then think about who has which share, thank you. What you see is Europe gradually losing share. Not because Europe is shrinking, but because others, mainly China, are growing faster than the EU. China is also increasing its quality significantly. So this isn't just a volume push. This is a volume and a quality push. China focuses strongly, mainly on computer vision. This is the most pronounced picture we've seen. Computer vision is needed, for instance, for facial recognition, which is a big policy topic for China. China is also relatively isolated. If you look at social media exposure in Western social media, Chinese scientific literature, even with abstracts or full text in English, doesn't get picked up in the buzz on social media that is in English. Europe is slowly but steadily losing top researchers. If you look at the size of the outflow bubble, it's slightly bigger than the inflow bubble. On the y-axis, we have a proxy indicator for quality, citation impact. On the x-axis, the relative productivity and how much output average researcher produces. So what Europe loses are people that are pretty average productive, but the most highly cited. The picture for the US is very different. You can find it in the main report. What is striking about the US is the strength of the corporate sector in research. This is the top 5 institutions in the US with the highest scientific production. And there's 2 corporations in there. And if current trends continue, in 5 years' time, Google will be in that list as well. In Europe, the entire top 10 is made out of public institutions, universities and national research institutions, China as well. So in the US, scientists can go to corporations to continue their scientific career, which also means they can go back to academia. And you see a lot of knowledge transfer between academia and business as a result. Ethics. Now, I had hoped to be here today and tell you about the wealth of scientific research that's being done on ethics and AI, but I can't. Because we found very little. So there's a lot of discourse. We hear that everywhere. There's a lot of discourse on ethics in AI, also in research. But as a research field with the scientific rigor, combining more than 2 millennia of ethics research, if you take the starting base with Aristotle, with artificial intelligence, which was coined in 1950, we haven't really scientifically joined the 2 up. One exception we found is on robots, robotics, and how they make decisions. So this is a typical word cloud if you look at that research area. So very much about the physical personification of AI, which is one tiny aspect of the ethics debate. So we also hope that others will pick this up as really a research topic. So there's a wealth more information, but I had really only 10 minutes. So I would like to welcome you to get one of the reports, download it from our website. We also have hard copies here. And with that, I'd like to give the word back to Marilyn and to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Just so you know, while you were talking, some people were asking for the report. So there are a few copies available here, and if you want more, just reach out to the Elsevier people. There are a few here in the room. Thanks, and that sets perfectly the scene for our next discussion on artificial intelligence, the ultimate challenge, the ultimate domain challenge as well, for international research and development. Can I invite our 4 panelists on the stage, please? And I'll introduce you. So on the left side, on your left side, we'll have Jaak Avikso. You are the rector at Tallinn University of Technology. Next to you, Nick Jennings, Vice Provost for Research and Enterprise at Imperial College London. In the middle, Elizabeth Ling, your Managing Director for Researcher Products and Research Metrics at Elsevier. And finally, Signorazzo, your Deputy Director General at DG Research, European Commission. Thank you to the 4 of you for joining us. I have to say that, unfortunately, we were informed right before this panel that Marie-Noëlle Semeria is also stuck in Paris, so it looks like we are cursed with our Paris guest today. Another traffic problem, so I think we're really going to need artificial intelligence to solve the traffic issues, but we can leave that for another day. So, thanks again. Let's kick off the discussion. Artificial intelligence, is it the monster that everybody think about, or such a game changer? What is it really about? Who wants to, just to set the scene with a quick reality check?
Yep.
Nick.
So I'm a professor of artificial intelligence and have been an AI researcher for 30 years. So I just wanted to sort of set the scene a bit on artificial intelligence. And so the first thing to say is that AI is not new. It's been around as a term. It was coined at a workshop in 1956. Alan Turing wrote about computing machines and can they think in the 1950s. So it's not new. In my career, I've lived through several summers and winters where people have been highly interested and highly uninterested in my subject. At the moment, it is probably at the most peak I've seen in terms of interest. Not all of this has been positive as a researcher in the domain, so there are many quotes. I've picked out a couple. Elon Musk described AI as an existential threat for humanity. That's quite a bold statement, I think. And an equally bold one is from Vladimir Putin, who said that the leader of AI will become the ruler of the world, which is that's a really interesting political statement from someone who might well aspire to be that. So we see lots of thought and commentary about AI, what it will do to jobs, what it will do to society. So I wanted to sort of just say a few words at the beginning about the reality of this. So AI will undoubtedly impact society. It will impact us at home, work, and play, but it's here today. So there are simple examples of AI being used today. You will almost certainly have interacted with some sort of AI system today, or certainly this week, in terms of digital assistants that try to make sense of what you say to them, in terms of recommendations for films, books, movies, restaurants, and the like, for ordering taxis and things like Uber. They're controlled and scheduled by AI algorithms. People who order from supermarkets and Amazon, those are run by robots and the like. So it's here today. And the interest in AI and why it's here today is sort of down to three main things. So one is the availability of data, second is the amount of processing power that we have available, and the third is the availability of slightly improved algorithms. But I say it in that order, and for me that is the order of importance. AI is here for narrowly defined tasks. So we continually read and see stories about AI solving some narrowly defined tasks. And then sort of, I think the mistake and the hype that is generated is the extrapolation from being good at some narrowly defined task to thinking, wow, if it can play Go like this, or if it can schedule a factory like this, imagine in a few years' time it will just be able to be super intelligent. And actually that gap from going from a narrowly defined task to artificial general intelligence is vast. We just don't know how to do it, and I don't think we will anytime soon. We see AI will replace some jobs, I think a small percentage of jobs. I think where AI will mainly come in is as an assistant and an augmenter of many people's activities, both jobs and sort of what they do in their home lives. So just a quick example, Imperial have recently developed an AI system for planning treatments for sepsis, a really important disease. Trained it on data of 100,000 patients, and it's able to make better than human performances. Now, that's for me not a great surprise, because actually this algorithm sees more in a few hours than a human expert will see in an entire lifetime. So it is not surprising that actually a machine can learn patterns and make improved diagnosis and prediction plans from it. But the point is that that's not all the physician or the radiographer who's looking at images and planning treatments does. That's part of what they do, and that's part that actually a machine can be good at and can be better than humans at. But there's a whole load of other activities that are part of this that actually machines are not good at, and I would contend are unlikely ever to be good at. So I really sort of see AI coming in as a partnership piece. So humans working alongside AI systems, complementing one another, complementing the expertise and talents that they have for one another. And so I very much sort of see AI as leading to a rise both in the humans as well as in the robots. And as has been alluded to, there are a number of challenges with the field. I'll just list a few and we'll probably come back to them. I think around the ethics of AI, what it means for society. I think understanding what an AI system is doing and why it's doing it is really important. Getting AI to be a better partner is a really important challenge, and sort of figuring out who is accountable when things don't go right.
Thank you. You've said it all.
Hopefully not.
Okay. So yeah, can I come to you? In your opinion, how artificial intelligence is transforming the research and innovation landscape?
Well, first of all, I think specialists who are developing technologies also are, on one hand, more familiar with the new technology, and on the other hand, a little bit more optimistic. But we know that all new technologies have been threatening when they were introduced. Even cars that were driving on our streets more than 100 years ago were by many, not only horses, but also humans, considered as an existential threat, and we should get rid of them. So I think that this is a natural phenomenon on one hand. But I think what makes very many technologies, and especially AI, different from previous, even disruptive technologies, is the speed of introduction. Things are happening very, very fast, and I think we've seen over the last 5 to 10 years, if we look closely at several services that we've been offered, and Nick clearly pointed to some of them, that they've appeared very, very fast, over 1 or 2 years. In 3 years' time, I think we see very dramatic changes. And I think we should be aware that very many people will be afraid of these technologies. They don't feel comfortable with these new technologies. And that, I think, is something we have to take very seriously, both as researchers as well as policymakers and politicians. And we don't want to contribute to even more instability in the world or in Europe. So I think that is one of the remarks I should like to make.
Very good. So let's put it in a slightly more positive spin. Elizabeth, how does artificial intelligence actually change the work that Elsevier is doing, especially in delivering those services to the researchers?
So I belong to an arm of Elsevier that maybe not everyone is aware of, which is digital products, digital product management. So my passion for 20 years has been to build the best digital applications for users. So really, in that context, what Elsevier tries to do is to support researchers with tools and services. And one example of AI is, for example, in Mendeley, which is a reference manager, on top of other things you do, so it's never a replacement, never meant to be a one-stop shop solution, but on top of things you already do, we provide you suggestions of other papers to read based on what is in your library. Other teams who work more on the health, and I think Nick alluded to that, work on products to improve diagnostic. If I had to, I would say repeat a sentence which really captured my imagination. It was in the book Life 3.0 by Max Tegmark, and he said, what about mindful optimism? So I think it really resonates with what we're trying to do. We're positive about it. We also want to be mindful about our practice and have really strong points of view on how diversity should be in there and other elements, so that it's mindful. It's not let's just go on and disrupt everything.
We heard this morning about the race around quantum science. I think we can speak also about a race around artificial intelligence. So, and in fact, every country in Europe, and well, not every country, but many countries in Europe and in the world are coming up with strategies from at the national level, at the government level, on what the government, what the country should do. I think the US have, and Trump himself has declared that artificial intelligence should be the second highest R&D priority for the US, right after security of people. So, how does that fit in the international cooperation landscape? How do we deal, on one side, on the necessity to partner up with different people and have a scientific advancement on one side, and national competition on the other? Sinia.
Artificial intelligence, as I heard, will provide very many opportunities for the people. This really has an opportunity to make our lives better, happier, if we are really able to use them for the development of humankind. Clearly, there are also some other applications which need not be so good, but leaving those aside and coming really now to the center of the discussion of this conference, namely, what would the opportunities for European researchers, as well as for our collaborators from other countries. As I heard this morning, European research program is open to the world. Perhaps I can also correct a small, so to say, misunderstanding that I heard as part of the panel discussions. Namely, even if you heard from Jean-Éric Paquet this morning, now the opportunities for getting associated to the new program, which is Horizon Europe, it doesn't mean that those countries who choose not to be associated can't cooperate with Europe, because our program will remain to be open. What is the researchers from the US today are the most successful ones among the researchers from third countries. There are already numerous also Chinese researchers, so meaning that there will be opportunities for everyone. Particularly in this area, which is artificial intelligence, and where there is actually a race globally, who will be able to invest more and who will also come up with new solutions based on AI. And here actually Europe has a lot to offer. First, what we can offer is our European Research Council based on excellence, really attracting top-level scientists from all over the world, attracting the best brains of the world.
But then that feeds back the national competition.
Then also the European Innovation Council, now also coming up to do, where we plan to do the same with the best innovators. Now, where Europe particularly is competitive is in the area of manufacturing. So all related areas related to AI, robotics, Internet of Things, everything that brings together digital with the physical world is actually an opportunity for Europe. And just to give you an example, this is why IBM decided in 2016 to create a new global division that connects AI and Internet of Things, and to locate the global headquarters of this new division in Munich, which employs over 1,000 engineers and entails more than $200 million of investment. We also support researchers addressing global challenges like health, energy, transport. Think about connected mobility. All these will give a lot of opportunities. Now, you also mentioned that there are strategies all over the world, and that's true. This is happening in the EU and also outside the EU. And this is why, now also based on that, the European Commission, a year ago, last spring, issued a communication on artificial intelligence with 3 main objectives. What do we need to do here in Europe? First, we need to increase public as well as private investments. We need to prepare the workforce with appropriate skills. And finally, we need to ensure appropriate ethical as well as legal framework. But we will have a chance to speak about these aspects more in detail.
Jack, please.
Well, I think I make a comment on the intervention of Signe. I think, and I hope that all of us agree that a better future for Europe is in more joint research and more cooperation between European partners, also between academia and industry, and also our global partners. That is more or less clear. At the same time, AI is very much related to data and big data. Big means really big. Big means even bigger than Germany, not to say bigger than Estonia. That means free movement of data. And that is a very complicated issue in Europe. We have our GDPR that is ethically, understandably a very high value. But I think we have to look at how we regulate and to what extent it poses threats to free research and also development of AI technologies that are based on big data, meaning really big. So I think that if we believe in liberal values, liberal democracy, free movement of people, free movement of data, vis-à-vis those ideologies who prefer a more concentrated, centralized approach and introducing restrictions, then I think we have to join our forces much more than we've done so far. And I think this is especially important in the case of AI and big data and data science.
So is that an international responsibility?
Well, very much so. I think if we compartmentalize either our legal spaces concerning free movement of data or research policies, if we cannot concentrate resources enough, like we have failed, if I may say so, in area of defense. A few good examples, but a big number of not that good examples all over Europe. And if we think that AI is strategic, as is missile and nuclear, then I think we should do better than we've done in the defense sector so far.
So if we think about the sort of, I guess, at least two angles and directions from which we can tackle this question of internationalization. So the first is in terms of the basic science, and the basic science of AI. So that's new machine learning algorithms, that's new vision algorithms. The science of those is absolutely done in international context. As a community, the AI community is a very open community. Most of the most powerful machine learning toolkits are freely available on the web. There's lots of good online courses about how to use them and how to become trained in them, and the scientific conferences are absolutely international. So sort of at a doing science bit, that is entirely international. Then when we start to think about where some of these new science and the frontiers and the new algorithms can be applied, then you start to sort of get into more national or pan-national considerations. So I think we need to pull those two apart. And I think it makes no sense to have any form of regulation on the basic algorithms. That's just not something that makes sense. I can't think of a sensible way in which that would make sense. When they've been trained and they have data inside them and they can make decisions and they're being used in a given application, that's a different business, because as Jaak says, there is the algorithms work and are powerful because they're trained on data. And some of that data might be synthetic data, but some of that will be our data that we have sometimes freely, sometimes knowingly, others times less so given away. And I think that's a really important distinction to make.
So artificial intelligence requires a lot of regulation yet to come, right? There is still a lot that needs to be done. Can I ask you, Elizabeth, from an industry, from a company point of view, where do you see a lack of regulation? Or is it, do you have the space you need to develop these products?
So first of all, I would say that I'm involved in a group which has been gathered by the European Commission, a high-level expert group on artificial intelligence, and I really welcome that. We are not approaching this from a regulatory point of view. We're first approaching it from an ethics point of view. Yeah. And I think it would be, and there seems to be a consensus, jumping to regulation would not be the right thing to do. We already have very strong laws in place in Europe, and I think everybody is absorbing that, implementing that, and doing things it's very important things are done in a lawful way. The ethics of it, I would say, the fascinating experience of this group is we are 50, and frankly, it's a really hard and hot debate, and we argue, and nobody is exactly in agreement, and really humbly, we're saying, it's really tough. It's a really hard problem. So I would say my answer would be, more dialogue, more international cooperation in figuring these things out together. That's, I would say, the practical thing. I think the automotive industry may be seeking, some ways to test safely cars. So there are very specific use cases where standards could be needed really fast, regulation, safety aspects, but they're not blanket for AI. I think for very specific use case in a certain context.
Signe.
Well, I'd also like to mention ethics as clearly a very crucial area, where first we need to have a clearly agreed European approach. And that's why the Commission and the Member States have now really brought together this European AI Alliance, and using the high-level experts in order to also to give guidance. What could be then the main principles of ethical principles of artificial intelligence. And here I'd like to mention just two very important aspects. First is the human-centered approach, so that we need to have AI for the humans, not the other way around. And then the other point is ethical, what we call ethical by design. So that if you design certain applications, then already you take these ethical principles into account. Clearly, for us Europeans, European rights and values, human rights are the, so to say, the guiding principles. But on the other hand, we should have a set of principles which can be also globally used. And here we'd really like to show a lead here, and also have this kind of discussions with our partners. And this is already something which is happening, because as we also bring together researchers from different parts of the world, because I'm in DG Research and Innovation responsible for international cooperation, and this is something that our foreign partners tell us. The Japanese, the Indians, even the Chinese say that, yes, this is an area we'd really like to work with you. At the beginning of January, I was in Washington, in the largest transport research conference there. And clearly also those who are working on connected automated driving saying, yes, we need ethical principles, and actually they are looking for a GDPR as a model. Something which has been quite controversial from the beginning has now gradually been accepted already as a good model to also to be followed. So I think that in this area we really could show leadership also globally. And it's also encouraging that in the UN, in the OECD, in G7 and G20, also this kind of discussions are now starting. And clearly, if we now also, using the best experts that we can find, can also put on and agree these ethical principles here to be then also followed by with and discussed with our partners.
So do you think the EU can take the lead in in generating regulation like a GDPR for AI?
Well, GDPR is there, so nothing has to happen with that. What I'm speaking is the ethical principles for AI now, because clearly the automated and connected mobility is another area to be developed, and this could need some more specific approaches in addition to these general principles. This is now something, also an area where we are looking for ethical principles.
Very good. Nick, and then I will open up to the floor if we'll collect a few questions from the audience.
Yep, so
yes.
I'd just like to say just a bit around sort of ethics and AI. And it is a hot topic, and it's clearly an important topic. But I find a lot of the debate sort of has little to do with AI specifically and is much to do with computer systems and digitalization, right? So if you think about ethics of autonomous vehicles, they're the same set of ethics whether the program controlling it is an AI system or a non-AI system. It makes no difference. The same set of ethical issues are apparent. And so people often put AI and ethics together. I think it's an overly narrow focus, and actually what they mean is computer systems or digital systems or whatever word you want, and there's very little specific about AI in the AI and ethics debate.
Very good.
Yeah, exactly to your point. I was going to reply to your question, which is I really don't see a horizontal need for horizontal regulation. I don't think any of us go into a plane and have a huge warning, you may fall off the cliff of that plane if the autopilot switches off. I think, so I don't see it as a transversal horizontal need. However, I think per industry, per use case, there will be certain needs to reinforce certain aspects, but absolutely, these two things should not be mingled.
Well, I very much agree, Nick, with your noticing that ethics has nothing that is very specific to AI. But I think we should see that when people speak about ethics and AI, they have a very clear fear behind it. They are afraid that these new technologies will manipulate us. And basically they are afraid that these scientists, they will do that one day. So they basically want to close some doors. That is the real reason of talking about ethics. And this is a complicated issue, and this is specific to AI, because people believe that they start manipulating our brains.
All right. I guess that's where social sciences come into the play. And then I'll take a couple of questions.
Well, just very briefly, because we also, well, at the beginning, also one of the fears, in addition to that, is that people are going to lose jobs. And clearly, with new technologies, we know that some of the jobs will be lost, but some new ones will be created. But we need to prepare people for this transformational change. And that's why also you need people with new set of skills. Mm-hmm. And this is also very much the focus of the EU on this, on the skills and also on the curricula, particular curricula at schools, and also the scholarships in the universities, in order to prepare us all for this kind of transformational change. I just wanted to make this comment as well.
Well, the question of skills is an entire debate, but since we are on skills, as a company, Elizabeth, are there any specific skills that you're currently lacking?
I would say there's a huge amount of jobs created by the digital, and having been in these 20 years, I think we are almost in shortage of any of these. So not just data scientists, computer engineers, quality engineers, interface designers. If there's an area which hasn't been talked about the whole day, I think is all of this is with an interface between the human and the algorithms. And I think where we need also more research is how to make these designs and interfaces actually understandable and clear, as well as convenient. We need more user researchers, people who understand how people use these tools. I think the ERC has a grant at the moment on how do we interact with robots? How do we think if the robot is a human, how does that change our behavior? So absolutely enormous amount of jobs opportunities, I would say, from our point of view.
Very good. Do we have any questions? Walter. Can we have a mic here? Walter Weigon from Huawei. Here, coming.
Yeah, Walter Weigel from European Research Institute of Huawei. I have one question because I'm on the BVA board, the Big Data BVP, and I see for Horizon 2020 I'm quite concerned, I have to say, that we now mix up the new AI PPP and the Big Data PPP and the Euro HPC flagship, and talking, certainly that's our strength, about ethics. But for instance, we have analyzed the Uber case in California. You can avoid this, but with current hardware you need about 600 watts. This means the electric car will not go anywhere anymore. And I asked myself, what's your opinion? Shall we not really keep the things apart and also look more into AI-specific hardware, where I see currently a lot of good professors in Europe, but not really engagement?
So is it a question for Signe?
I'm afraid there is a very bad echo, so it's not so easy to actually hear what you are. If you can perhaps
Just shorten the question.
No, it's just the sound.
The question was about the financing of AI in Horizon 2020.
Yeah, my question was about mixing up in Horizon Europe AI, big data, and HPC. Whether this makes sense? Question mark.
Currently, what is invested? In Horizon Europe, dedicated to AI now for the time being by 2020. There will be 1.5 billion into research and innovation related to this area, which is 70% more than in the previous period, that is from 2014 to 17. And now, as a result of the coordinated joint action with the member state, it has been decided that we need to put at least 20 billion of public and private investments in AI until the end of 2020, and more than 20 billion per year from both public and private investments over the following decade. So that's much on the investment side.
Can I give a scientific answer? So from a science point of view, they should absolutely be connected. You don't want silos where you have an HPC set of activities going on over here and an AI set of activities going on here. They absolutely have to go together. You need advanced hardware to be able to scale, to take the data, the pace and the volume of it, and keeping them apart scientifically is an illiterate thing to do, I think.
So you seem to agree both on the academic side and the industry side. Too many PPPs then, right? If HPC, big data, and AI have to be that together. Do we take one more question? We can take, so I'll take two more, all right? So there is one here.
Yeah, Thomas Jørgensen from the European University Association. About the ethics and the regulation, I get, and I might be wrong here, a feeling that we're basically talking about the same thing, that the technologies we have are so transversal, so regulations that are technology specific and ethics that are technology specific make no sense. You need to look at the application of it. That was a bit also the impression I got reading the AI high-level group recommendations, where you saw there was an assessment system, and you say, well, this is very good, but it looks like an ordinary assessment system, and it would be parallel to similar assessment systems. So, are we talking about the same things, that we try to regulate something that's really a technology, where we want to regulate the specific use of that technology? And the same would go for the ethics of that technology, if I make myself clear.
Let's take another question here, Renit. Can you introduce yourself, actually?
I had a question on for Nick Jennings. So you mentioned that the academic community around AI is a very open one, globally very interconnected and open. But we also saw in the analysis of Elsevier how active big tech companies are also on the science part of AI, very often because they also sit on big data, and that also allows them to attract really the brightest of researchers because they have that asset. So I was wondering, to which extent are these corporate companies, when they're engaged in publications in science, are they as committed to openness and connectiveness and non-proprietary
Yep. Let me answer that, and then I'll say a word on that. So in my experience, so we engage with a lot of the tech industry at Imperial, and actually our experience and engagement with them is very positive in terms of publishing. Many of the people who've gone into them come from an academic background, want to be able to publish and talk about their work. Of course, that's not all of their work, and that's not all of their data goes into the public domain, but sort of as a science area, I find it one that's reasonably open, and the companies, many of the companies, even the big tech companies who work in this space, are happy to have a portion of what they do out in the open. Of course, they do bits that they keep to themselves, and they're much more circumspect about. So that's my experience. In terms of the regulation, I absolutely agree with the point about I think regulation should be done within the existing structures and vehicles that we have, right? So, we have an automotive sector. I think regulation for autonomous vehicles should go with that. We have a medical sector. I think medication of the regulation of AI and medicine goes with that. I don't think it's something special where you say, right, there's going to be non-AI or even just digital activities to do with diagnosis or treatment, and then there's going to be a non-health one of those. They've got to be together, otherwise you've got entirely artificial silos between them.
If I may, also on the regulation, well, clearly we don't need per each technology specific regulation or legislation. We need to analyze where are the gaps, where there is actually a vacuum, where we need something. Whether, well, say in the health area, for instance, the applications, there are some issues that we still need to cover. That's why what we use in European legislation is the so-called innovation principle, meaning that regulation should be helping innovation and not curbing innovation. And this is also something which we advocate to the member states, because very often when you cross the borders, say with your automated car, then you find out that there is something which does not enable you to do so. So this is something we really need to look also across Europe, and this is clearly something which we advocate.
Can we come back to the question of data sharing? This is something that needs to be tackled also at the European and international level, right? And the Commission is working towards its cloud, European Science Cloud, the Plan S, and so on. So we are sharing the data. What is needed to have a real advancement in artificial intelligence, taking into account what are the limitations of sharing too much data? Who wants to give it a try?
Well, I think there is a long list of limitations. If we start counting them, then usually it starts from national security. How long the list is always debatable, but there is a number of items there. Then, understandably, privacy. Also, quite a long list. Where it stops, how far we go, is a complicated issue. There is not too much left over. Maybe some research data that have no relationship towards national security on one hand, and to privacy, possible privacy breaching on the other hand. So I think that this is something we should discuss much more openly than we've done so far, and much more specifically than we've done so far.
Just now commenting on privacy, because clearly this has been something somewhat controversial, also discussions, but now I think it's much more also on the people's minds, because now I've seen how the privacy of the people have been intervened as part of the elections in different countries, Well, just think about Cambridge Analytica case. Think about also the data of the different platforms that have been misused, which actually now people, as a result, understand much better the need also for the privacy issues. But it actually gives also the opportunities for researchers. And I just here have an example about an Estonian company, by the way, which has developed ShareMind, a data analysis platform that aggregates and analyzes private data using cryptographic solutions. And this platform uses secure computing technology and also allows data owners to share data in encrypted form, while giving no access to the original data partners. So there are actually also the possibilities how to do that in such a form which actually takes into account the privacy issues.
Elizabeth first and then Nick.
Yeah. On the point about data, I think of course all our businesses and our services are more and more related to data. And with the work we do as signatories of the European Open Science Cloud, I think what seems very important is to consider that in order to make these data sets available, and we are just here to support, right? We don't own these data sets. You have to follow these standards.
You don't own the research data.
Excuse me?
You don't own
No, we don't own the research
data.
Absolutely, but the work we do with that community along the FAIR principles, right? Findable, reusable, accessible, interoperable, reminds me also of real-life example with a friend of mine, professor of oncology in Oxford, and she has lots of clinical data, but the work to make that data usable is also actually an investment. So I think what's interesting from all these initiatives is putting effort and money into an investment into making these data sets reusable, having the metadata to reuse them. So rather than limitations, I think let's think enablers. How do we leverage that data? What are the smallest number of enablers possible to reuse those data sets?
So I think there are a variety of a number of different types of data. So in Europe, there's quite a flourishing open data movement, and a number of countries, including the UK, have open data institutes. And actually, that's about putting data available, sharing it, and really open to the world. And so some data is absolutely of that form. Other forms of data you want to be much more circumspect about, so some of the homomorphic encryption that you're speaking about is the most secure way of doing it. Many of those systems don't yet scale because we don't yet have the science to be able to do that at particularly large scale yet. So that's sort of that's another piece of it. But sort of the point also about getting data in the right form is a really important thing to understand when embarking on a project, an AI project and machine learning project. Many people believe that sort of 80% of a project is about data wrangling, getting the data into the right form to be able to use it and make sense of it, and then actually putting the smart bit, the clever bit, the machine learning bit on top of it is a comparatively easier task than getting your data into the right form in the first place.
All right.
But just reminding that we also have the open science, meaning that also all the results of the projects should be open. And open to be used, and also the science cloud that I guess has been mentioned before here today. But if we speak about also AI-based solutions, then well you need data. Well, let's take personalized medicine, which is really a developing area, which is based on data. But there we also need agreement how to share these data. With the countries with whom we cooperate. So coming back again that we really need international solutions for all of that.
I think it's a nice way to wrap up this discussion. So we'll stop here because we still have a couple of panels, but I'd like to thank you very much. So big thank you to the four of you.
Thank you.
Time for coffee. Then we come back.
to speak in a conference in the afternoon after the coffee break, but I trust you will help me to overcome this challenge. Sorry to start on time. We have a Finnish citizen in our panel, and I learned from them that being on time is something very important. Good afternoon, everyone, again. My name is Philippe Van Rie. I am the head of the Eureka Secretariat, the agency behind the Eureka Network, an international association of 40+ member countries who are developing international collaborative support, financial and non-financial, to innovation champions, highly innovation projects, research-driven projects, SMEs, corporate. I'm sorry to disturb you, ladies and gentlemen. Could you take a seat and stop chatting? Thank you very much. May I? Excuse me, we have started. Thank you. Yes, a bit of discipline in innovation partnership is very important. We'll talk about that later, on how to seal and implement an international innovation partnership. So it's also a matter of method. So I was talking about Eureka, and even though I was not invited to talk about Eureka, I just finished my sentence and tell you a little bit more about why we have been asked to moderate this international innovation partnership session. One of the reasons is indeed because a few principles that are behind the Eureka method are probably universal, and I would like that we talk about it. The bottom-up approach, the innovation drive, the industry-driven approaches, and I salute a few of our industry leaders from the Eureka clusters. Thank you for being there. And collaborative and definitely international, transnational. These principles apply across a number of instruments that we are deploying, as that you might have heard about: Eurostars, Global Stars, the clusters, and a few new initiatives providing access to new markets, overseas markets. This is a point we will be talking about, and access to investors. This is a point that is at the vicinity of what we'll talk. This conference spoke about Global Horizon, or Horizon Global. I don't know how Director General Paquette mentioned it this morning. You talked about global science. It's also a matter of global innovation. I just want to make a slight distinction between the three subjects, and because indeed building global innovation partnership is something slightly different than building conventional or non-conventional research partnerships. And to do that, we would like to do it with a few inspiring players, friends, that will talk about that with us. So without waiting any longer, I would like to call on stage the four panelists. Lady first, Lina Pish-Thomas is coming straight from Bangalore, I think, this morning or yesterday. Lina is really an entrepreneur, an Indian entrepreneur who has been experienced in various markets in the US, in Asia, in Europe, and who is the founder of a company called Global Business Inroads. What a nice symbol to talk about international innovation partnership. We will hear later, Lina, that you are very, very active precisely on the EU-India innovation collaboration. You will talk about that later. Welcome. Pekka Soini, I already mentioned his presence. He's our Nordic panelist. Pekka is well known in this audience. He's the CEO of Business Finland. And it's very interesting. It will be one question later to you, Pekka. When talking about research and innovation, why did you choose Business Finland instead of Innovation Finland or whatever? So we'll talk about that. I know business development, business growth is a value for you. Before being the CEO of Business Finland, you have been the CEO of Tekes, one of the two founder component of Business Finland. And before that, you worked for Nokia Siemens Network for a number of years as an engineer. And of course, I'm sorry I don't mention your whole CV, how many boards and which boards you are a member of, but we'll come back later to that. Bozoon Tijani, Please, Tijani, not Tajani, so it's an important precision. Bozun, thank you for coming from Lagos. Actually, you was in Kigali instead, but Bozun is another entrepreneur, another innovator, the founder of the Co-Creation Hub in Nigeria, which is networking across Africa now, if I'm not mistaken. You are also a support of the Yaba Technology Cluster, a startup creator yourself. You created and you supported a number of tech startups in Nigeria and across Sub-Saharan Africa. And what I read in your CV is quite interesting, not only because you are in Africa, but you also supported a lot of social innovation tech startups. And I would like later to talk about that. You're a fan of ecosystems, and you have a theory about systems, innovation systems, ecosystems. I'm sure it will interest people later. And last but not least, you are one of the few that your company was visited by Mark Zuckerberg, isn't it? So you will give me his private mobile phone, please. I need a sponsor. Thank you. To finish with, it's my pleasure to invite Ronald de Bruyn. Ronald is the well-known director of the Cost Association. He was before the director of the EIT in Budapest and was one of the leader of the ENISA agency, so a champion, a specialist of executive European agencies, isn't it? That's also how you define yourself, how to build and animate and improve agencies with a very operational goal. Before being a champion of agencies, you have worked in the public sector in the Netherlands on cybersecurity and information society matters, to cut a long story short, and you are a legal guy with computer science excellence on top of it. So that's it. Is there something I missed in your profile or something I made wrong? Do you want to add anything for your defense so far? Nothing. Okay.
I surrender.
Okay, good. Good. Okay. Well, the name of the game, you have understood, I speak a lot, I speak fast. Interrupt me when you want. And make a gesture, manifest yourself, express yourself, and interrupt us when you want. I have a first question to launch the discussion. It's a question to Pekka. The topic of the round table is open to the world at the end of the day. It's about free trade, open collaboration. In the paper produced by Science Business, you are mentioning that we might be at the edge of a new era for transnational collaboration. I don't know, but I see a lot of threats, a lot of negative signals coming from political leaders about protectionism, about the limitation of global economy. Are you, as a small country representative, as a champion of collaboration from a small country, what's your view about this protectionism versus open to the world collaboration in the field of innovation, Pekka?
All right, yeah, thank you, Philip. Finland, as you mentioned, is a small country, small open country. And that means that we don't have our home market, really. I mean, that everything what is market for Finnish companies is outside Finland. So that has always been so, that, and that means that that is the starting point, that we need to reach out. So that is very important. And then it means that everything what we do or create, innovate, has to be globally competitive. So nothing kind of secondary, tertiary kind of competitiveness is not enough. So you need to be the best where you are. So that is very important, and that has been always the case in Finland. And now when we are looking that what kind of challenges, what kind of competitiveness is needed in the world, even more we need now collaboration. And that has been very evident already now, like 10 years, that larger companies which have been in traditional era, pulp and paper, machinery and that kind of companies, they have realized that, hey, they can develop everything what is needed in this digitalization world and changing world. So they need to open up first to, smaller companies, locally, but that is not enough. They need to do collaboration internationally also much more. So it is, we are really pushing openness and in a political, when you're referring to political kind of atmosphere, always that is an issue that how freely you can get foreign people to Finland. And therefore we need to reach out more to kind of other countries and getting collaboration in that sense. But also openness, getting to collaborate, investing in Finland. Those are the issues which are very relevant, more and more.
Does this require that your instruments to activate this open collaboration should take eventually new routes? I refer to the last moment we met in Helsinki. We met incidentally in the middle of slush. I suppose everybody knows about what is slush. And I was fascinated by the fact to see, let's say, without offending, a conventional national innovation agency, Business Finland, exhibiting in the middle of the new kids on the blocks. I saw this, and my question is, how do you refresh your various networks, clusters, partnerships to make sure you are still on the edge of connecting the right dots around Finland to attract the best, to attract, to create this crossroad of knowledge and collaboration. Can you elaborate a little bit about that, knowing that, of course, you have a vast worldwide network of offices also capturing the various global opportunities?
Yeah, well, we are lucky in Finland that our kind of task as Business Finland is covering all sizes of companies, from startups to mid-caps to large companies, and also research, kind of the innovation-driven network research. That's our angle in the research funding. So we are funding these other, all kind of actors in Finland. So that is very important that we are already connecting the dots in that sense. But also not only funding the innovation projects which are coming from bottom up, but also we create platforms, ecosystems, or enabling ecosystem creation. One good example is 1C ecosystem, what is an ecosystem what is driven by, it is a business ecosystem. It is driven by larger companies, Rolls-Royce, Wärtsilä, ABB, and so forth, but it's tens of smaller companies or research institutes. Target is to create autonomous shipping. And that is not existing yet, but world is going towards that, and why not to do it in Finland first in the world? And there you need collaboration with the public side, like Ministry of Transportation is setting up a piece of sea where these autonomous ships can be tested and piloted and so forth. And so the enabling regulation has to be part of it. And that is possible in a small country as Finland. And we try to position ourselves as a kind of forerunner in changing regulation or enabling regulation for the new things to happen. Another good example is health data and what kind of innovation can be done utilizing health data very efficiently and so forth. But by definition, both of these examples, like autonomous shipping or health data kind of developments, require international collaboration. And as you said, we have a large network. We have 40 locations in the world, over 100 people in different parts of the world, connecting there, again, the kind of the best actors and so forth. So we are reaching out to do collaboration, and then our approach is that we try to set up Finland as a best test bed in the world in terms of the new developments, but not alone.
Okay, wait a minute. We have a lot of respect for Finland, but we'll talk about other countries as well. Thank you, Pekka. You speak about networks. You speak about networks, not a surprise for ex-Nokia Siemens network. But the next speaker, I would like to ask Ronald, who is an organized network specialist in Brussels. How do you think, Ronald, that a network like COST and similar networked infrastructures are also instrumental in creating the vision, the conditions of this new era for global innovation partnership? Do you think, and maybe, is this part of the genes of COST? Is this part of the genes, and how do you see a platform like your, a very organized platform, being also serving the cause of international innovation partnership across Europe and beyond? Ronald.
Thank you for that question. I can give a very short answer and I give a very long answer. The short first is excellence has no borders. So you cannot grab it and put it in a container. And the time that research was conducted in splendid isolation, did not deliver the results as we could achieve when collaborating. So these are all open doors. Right? The question is, of course, how you go about it. And in 1971, a group of smart people, I think, came together to see if in the field of research there could be some pooling of national research capacities being brought together in networks, bringing together people from all over Europe and actually beyond. And this was the precursor for the European framework programs that are at that time not in place yet. So now we are talking in the context of Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe, but we should not forget that the ultimate goal is a policy goal. The policy goal is the better functioning of the European research area, the free flow of ideas and so forth and people and researchers. So let's say the internal market of research. And the Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe are the financial implementation instruments. And of course, the focus is very much on the money today. Now, having said that, COST has indeed made it its core business to bring people together, but not only in Europe. We also look at engaging people from what we call the near neighbor countries. So from a geographical point of view, these typically are the countries in Northern Africa, the eastern side of the Mediterranean, but also Ukraine, Russia. Those participants are actually invited where the cost actions, as we call them, those networks, get some extra money to cover their expenditures. To make it absolutely clear, COST does not fund research or innovation itself. We bring together the people in networks and we finance, through a grant, the expenditures that people need for travel and go to training schools and on short-term mobility schemes and so forth. So apart from that, COST is also open to the world. Yeah. And I think that I look to the two other speakers here. Everybody actually can participate in COST. The only thing is, of course, that beyond the perimeter of the near neighbor country zone, you have to cover your own expenditures. In the end, also COST has its limits, financially, of course. But that, in a nutshell, is how we operate and why.
Thank you, Ronald. Indeed, and sorry, having started with Europeans, lady and gentlemen from outside Europe, but of course I'm very much interested now to know about your perspective, why you Indian companies, Indian partnership, you African partnership, African companies are interested with an emerging economy perspective by building bridges with Europeans and non-Europeans in the development of innovation. Is the building of innovation partnership a golden method for you as well to create growth, wealth, and future perspective for your economies? Maybe Lina to start with. I read in your CV that you are particularly involved in using the tech transfer challenge to create those bridges, those links tech transfer for very pragmatic problem solving, not only for making policies, but for a very pragmatic approach. Could you a little bit give us your vision about why have you traveled from Bangalore to Brussels to speak about that here? Maybe because you're interested by Europe, or for what other reasons?
Brussels is nice, that's why. Anyway, so, thank you, Philippe, for the introduction. In fact, I should say a few words about why, we first of all set up Global Business Inroads. Really, if you look at what's happening globally, there is so much of innovation that's taking place. There are so many technologies being developed. And I, before starting the company, was really involved with working with the US government and Bill Clinton's foundation to really identify climate mitigation technologies like energy efficiency or renewable energy and bringing that, into India. So when the whole purpose of setting up this company was to identify innovations from around the world and bring it to solve the challenges and the problems that India is facing. Sorry, should I use the other microphone?
Just brief, a few seconds, think about your next question while, okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So, to answer that, to answer the question, we are, the whole focus is there are a lot of key challenges that India is facing, whether it comes to saving energy, adopting newer, cleaner energy resources, improving industrial energy efficiency, waste management, etc. And that's how we began to look at identifying technologies around the world to solve these specific problems. And in fact, one of the challenges we initially had was when we would, meet European companies, they would, it's not that easy for them as well to have the resources to look at, India as a market. For example, they'd probably be more interested in going to the United States or maybe to China and even convincing them, or even, for a European, for a French company, going to Germany is international. So, we had all of these challenges, but so, over the years, we've been able to work with over 100 innovative companies, institutions, and researchers, helping them and guiding them into India market access opportunities, building collaborations, building ecosystems. And one of the things we found most invaluable was the opportunity to actually build ecosystems for technology companies in India. So often when a technology company comes to India, they are trying to sell. So, and that's one of the, that's like a failed approach at every step, because when you come with a sales approach, you're trying to do a deal without understanding the needs and the challenges of a given market. But when we looked at the approach of validate the market, build the ecosystem of customers, partners, R&D partners, manufacturers, distributors, and then try to deploy your technology that has a more sustainable approach towards entering the Indian market. But so that was about, until 5 years ago, we were only focused on bringing international innovation into India, done a lot of work with European companies, clusters, research organizations, but, obviously now India has had a huge, leapfrog development since we've had the new Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, and with him came in the whole innovation policy, as well as funding for various innovation programs in India, the funding for incubators, funding for research, funding also for startups in the country, and building a lot of institutional capacity, both at the federal level, as well as the state and city government level. So with that in place now, we have been very active in helping Indian innovation basically, look at market opportunities in India and beyond. And now that brings me to the reason, why I'm here today working very closely with the European Commission's DG RTD in really building a EU-India innovation partnership, which is a network of, and really what it means, it has two elements, where we are building a network of incubators. So an incubator in Europe or in India represents an ecosystem of their own, of their startups, their mentors, their investors, corporates. So what we want to do is link up these two ecosystems. But what is the aim? The aim is to really help the startups from both the regions, meet, partner, co-create, find markets, meet and also build ecosystems for themselves in each other's areas. And the reason we did not really look at an approach where, okay, let's take a bunch of Indian startups and incubators to an event, because there are a lot of great events. I mean, there's Slush, there's a lot of, these, pointed events happening all over Europe. But what we did was create a sustainable, long-term, almost, 2.5-year pilot to really connect the ecosystems, handhold them. And also now we are in the process of building, an ecosystem of corporates, both from Europe and India, investors, again from Europe and India, as well as mentors. And one of the things we really need to address now is how do we really, get to fund the mobility of startups between Europe and India. But I'm sure we can talk about that, in the course of this.
Thank you very much, Lina. So happy to hear that the goal of innovation partnership between India and EU is not only about maximizing outsourcing to Bangalore call centers, but also to build something more substantial and more smarter and wider. That's very important. In the notes you have shared with me, a number of you have also insisted on the need to develop a win-win partnership protocol between the various partners in play. Let's travel fast to Africa, Bozoon. In your notes precisely that you shared with me, I was interested to look at the justification, as the reasons why you, as a stakeholder of the new innovation and startup scene in Nigeria and around, are justifying the search for international, cross-border, transcontinental innovation partnership. And I landed on one key point, which is education, skills development, and knowledge formation. Could you a little bit elaborate on that? And I know you are busy in a few H2020 projects precisely on increasing capabilities in STEM disciplines. But how is this related to the development of sustainable, highly innovative businesses and your own role of stakeholders?
Thank you, Philip. I think, just to shed a bit of light on why I'm here in the first place. And I'll start about that by saying, I think everyone in the room is aware of the fact that the world we live in today is evolving at a very high pace. We believe that society is changing significantly. Technology is also changing the world we live in, the way we live, the way we do business, the way we interact. But I think there's a disconnect in the way people see that and the way people see Africa. And the disconnect is that we still focus too much on the things that are wrong about Africa and not the opportunities. Because Africa is one of the continents where you have the youngest population, and that's still growing. And what you have there is a very powerful resource. Because the young people you have in Africa today have exactly the same level of information and quality of information as the kids you have in Europe or the US, regardless of what the education system is, because education itself is changing. Kids are no longer learning the way we presume that they should learn. And the implication of that is that you have a continent that is developing at an interesting pace, but the rest of the world is probably not paying attention. The only country that is paying serious attention is probably China. And even the relationship with China is not the sort of relationship that we like, because it's more transactional than actual development. But Africa is a continent that is growing, is a continent with a lot of young people that in 10, 15, 20 years' time will demand for more. Africa is a continent with poor infrastructure, which means we have to build infrastructure. And the beauty of that is it's not just a place with poor infrastructure. It means that there's no burden of legacy infrastructure. So Africa has the chance to build really, really smart infrastructure, which in itself is a business opportunity. Africa would require science. Africa would require innovation. And this is the way the young people are thinking. So again, when we talk innovation, you find that the kind of reaction you get in Europe is still very research-based. thinking around innovation. You know, when you mentioned about cost, you talked about research. And most of the time when people talk about research, because we have really weak national innovation systems in most African countries, when you talk excellence in research, African countries or researchers are not the likely partners that you're thinking of. But again, this is no longer the truth. You know, which is why in my message to you, I propose something which is almost like distributed innovation system, whereby knowledge that is required to innovate doesn't necessarily need to reside in one location. And this is what we're already doing. So to cut the long story short, I think what Africa needs at the moment are not just partners that seize opportunity for transaction, but they are partners that seize the fact that for Africa to leapfrog development in the different areas where we still have opportunity, we need to be innovative. We need to apply technology. And to apply technology, we need partners that think of high-tech. We need partners that think of applying research. We need partners that sees the future on the continent as well, that if I invest along with the new breed of leaders that are popping up on the continent, then we have opportunity for real partnership. And personally, I think the historical relationship between Europe and Africa means a lot is possible. Because the closest continent to Africa is actually Europe. We have a lot of ties together. But I don't think we're taking advantage of the application of the knowledge that resides in Europe. You look at so many European universities, there are tons of research results that are not being put to good use. A lot of these research results can actually cause positive change in Africa. But we've not built the bridge to connect the knowledge in Europe to real needs in Africa. And until we do that, Europe can't claim to be supporting Africa more thoroughly to build capacity. But at the same time, it's not a one-directional relationship. It's also about building opportunities for Europe to actually be part of the future that we're looking at, which is why we're part of the project you mentioned. We have partners from EPFL in Switzerland, which is probably one of the best universities in Europe. We have partners from University of Twente. Literally what we're doing within this project is still quite mainstream everywhere in the world as well. We're applying something that is called inquiry learning. So we're changing the way kids are taught in school. Probably Finland will have an understanding of this more than anyone else. We're trying to encourage, we're piloting in Nigeria, Republic of Benin, and Kenya. We're changing the way teachers teach. We're moving them away from instructional way of teaching to inquiry, whereby they lead the people to discover. And this is possible thanks to digital technology. And within that as well, just to quickly mention, is the STEM education element, where we use digital laboratory. So as against using physical laboratory to train kids, we give them a game-like environment where they can perform their own research, try to break things, make things up, and they learn better doing that. And that's what this project is all about.
Thank you, Buzz. I have two more questions for you in your stories. You are actually a non-governmental organization, right? And so you do, Lena. We see that in our traditional pattern of international innovation partnership, things are taking place between governmental organizations, between ministries, between agencies, very often at national levels, at centralized level. I would like to know, and it's a question to both of you NGOs representatives, how you think NGOs like you, who are the new accelerators on the ecosystems, how you can find your place in the picture of a partnership which is inevitably interinstitutional. So in your respective geographical circumstances, how can you survive? And I know you was accompanying the president of Nigeria when President Macron visited Nigeria a few months ago, but how did you find your place in this very strongly institutional picture?
I think the way you need to look at it is the fact that what Africa needs is leadership, and you know, the kind of leadership we need, it's unlikely leadership. It's not necessarily what people traditionally expect. So we're not an NGO, we're a social enterprise, but we set out from day one to do works that will cause positive change in the society. And when we started 8 years ago, and I always like to narrate this story when I'm in Europe, because my thinking and interest in innovation actually started from Europe when I used to live in the UK, and I was the project manager of a coordination action project, which was looking to harmonize the innovation policy of the different European countries. So I had that privilege of being part of that project. So when I returned to Nigeria, I decided I was going to start an innovation center that provides the platform for people who want to innovate, to get support. But we didn't stop there, because we realized that the ecosystem was quite strong, and the easiest way to get support was to pull different organizations together. So individually, I went to the state governor of Lagos State, and I negotiated for them to lay fiber optic cable in a neighborhood in Lagos called Yaba. So this neighborhood is probably the only neighborhood in the whole of Africa with the highest number of tertiary institutions, and quite a lot of key governmental organizations as well. But there was no fiber internet there. So we did this. I also spoke to the private company that owns the fiber optic cable in Nigeria. And I explained to them the benefit of a cluster, the advantage that a cluster can bring to the development of a sector in the country. In less than 12 months, the fiber optic cable was laid, and we had over 70 technology businesses move into the neighborhood. So this was literally a bottom-up cluster program. It wasn't led by the government. The government didn't spend any money on it. And it became the most organic technology location in the whole of Africa, which was why the founder of Facebook also came to this location. So for me as a person, I activated personal leadership to contribute to the development of the country. So I earned my seat at the table, not because I'm connected to people, but because of what I brought to my people. And I think this is what you're seeing with more young people on the continent, taking ownership, whether they are within or outside of government.
Okay, thank you, Bosun. Maybe a contribution, Lena. I know you are working with clusters all across India.
Yeah, and in fact, I think there is an absolute synergy and need for the public sector to work closely with the private sector. We have always done that. In fact, our GBI is a private company completely, and we have served both the public sector as well as the private sector in terms of their innovation and technology needs. So I'll give you one example. You know, when we started out, we looked at a lot of the problems in India. One of them was about distributed power generation, because it was difficult to build, you know, the regular electric grids into the villages of India. So how do you look at distributed power? So we submitted a paper on this to the US Department of Energy, and they funded the study to take place in the Himalayas, where there's never going to be access to the grid, for example. So after we did that study, we realized that there was a very strong potential to deploy, you know, distributed mini-grids in India with solar, with renewable energy. We then reached out to companies all over the world. We had, you know, companies from the US that showed interest to deploy these mini-grids. Then finally, we actually partnered with a Lebanese company that was doing work in Africa to also come and look at distributed power units, you know, in India. So here is a very good example of how the public sector really creates the opportunity to, you know, drive ideas. And in fact, when we did the US DOE study, they also had researchers from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory to actually help us in doing that research. So it was a combination of government, research, as well as private sector that actually led to technology deployment. We did a similar exercise again with energy storage. Today, battery technologies are very important in India. We are, you know, as we are scaling the use of solar, we need to have more battery technology deployed. And again, over there, we had, you know, we had the US Department of Energy fund the study. Then we did a tech scouting call for an Indian corporate. We scouted for technologies around the world. We have some European technologies, Chinese technologies who have applied to be a part of that. And then now you kind of, you know, we're building the business model for the deployment of the technology in India. So these are some of the, you know, interesting examples. And actually, I'm very happy to say that a few weeks ago, you know, our company had applied along with University of Brussels to do a project, you know, under Horizon 2020 on modeling, you know, distributed power communities in both Europe and India, and we won that grant as well. So, and it's really, again, a collaboration of public and private sector really coming together to make things happen. So the problem exists. You know, government can play a role to solve that strategically because the private sector is not going to pay for a feasibility study on a technology unless it's proven, right? So they really want to go in for things that are proven. So this is where the government can really pitch in to play a role in, you know, funding feasibility studies on foreign technologies coming into new markets, looking at funding demonstrations of foreign technologies, and then the private sector can take it up and take it forward.
Okay, thank you, Lina. Let's stay on the private sector for a little more moment. And when I say private sector, maybe for the moment, let's zoom on large corporations and how big industry can influence and are an essential player in the deployment of international innovation partnership. And I've recognized in the room a few leaders of European industry leaders. I recognize Philips on the back of the room there, and Intel somewhere else, and a lot of others. This is a question I have for Ronald and Pekka, who are more on the public sector side. How do you see the intervention logic of large corporation, of large anchoring industry leaders in the development of new model of innovation partnership across the globe? Of course, across Europe, we have a few models that works well, commission or not commission funded. But what's your ideas about that? How the private sector and especially the structuring player can play a role in the development of this innovation and research/innovation innovation partnership? And maybe I start with Ronald. I know you, as a research, as a more upstream research organization, I would be interested to know your views first on how you react on that.
Well, as a matter of fact, we put in place, end of last year, a new strategy for the remainder of the Horizon 2020 period, but also for the next framework program, Horizon Europe. And there we made a significant, let's say, refocusing. It's not only research anymore, but it's research and innovation. And this is chosen in a very deliberate way, because if you look into the networks as they are developing themselves, we roughly have 45,000 researchers and innovators active in our networks. So it's still very much academic research oriented, but we also see at the same time that roughly 1,000 businesses are cooperating. And this is a blend of SMEs on the one hand, but also, let's say, big companies, you know, like IBM, Unilever, Nestlé, and so forth, who see a value in a free flow of ideas and exchanges without having to tackle or being worried about IPR, because we do networking only. Now, taking that as a fruitile, let's say, point of departure, we will put in place in the next framework program, and we are preparing the grounds to do a pilot under this framework program, a Cost Innovators Grant. And the idea is to enable, let's say, the cost networks, or the cost actions as we call them, to have an add-on grant after the period of 4 years in which they normally are active. And this is really to cater for taking it a step further, bridging the gap to more innovation-prone schemes or maybe even investments, where we look at not only the innovation potential, but also look at is there, let's say, a viable exploitation plan. Now, this is still under development, but what we feel is going to materialize is an approach where we ask them in 1 year's time to be more mindful about the business side. So to develop a business model and to put in place an IPR arrangement for themselves to prepare for the next step, where it really is about innovation and investments and so forth. So this is a little bit how we go about it. If you ask me, let's say, apart from cost, I have a simple observation. The vast majority of investment in research, but also innovation, is done by business. The European Union budget is only a fraction, so let's not overestimate. So I think by saying that, I've already answered your question, that we can only depend, you know, on big corporates, but also SMEs, and also organizations in ecosystems. This is very viable, a viable and fertile ground, of course. That's where we need to build upon. It's not to reverse the model and have a top-down design put in place.
Yeah, thank you, Ronald. And you demonstrated that the borders between research, innovation, commercialization, proof of concept, etc. is starting to disappear. I, of course, will have to speak with you now, because we need probably as complementary networks to align our speciality. So for sure, if cost is moving in this direction, probably the other networks will have to move in direction and find the right fine-tuning. But certainly, I applaud the fact that a traditionally research-focused association is considering to move at the vicinity of research excellence. Pekka, you already mentioned the role of industry and large industry in the Finnish ecosystem. And my question is the following. Ronald is mentioning that very smartly that indeed the main investor in research is industry. And research is one thing. We also see, and this is something that has been said here and there between the lines, that one of the carrier of the development of new innovation is not necessarily pure collaborative research, but open innovation. So it's not necessarily only creating platforms and instruments to put resources together to lever pure research. This panel is supposed to talk about innovation, and I would like you to talk about open innovation precisely. In Finland, I know we all know that a few companies are icons of open innovation patterns in the way they develop innovation, business and research. And I was fascinated by one mid-sized Finnish company called Wärtsilä, who is not necessarily a giant, but who also develop open innovation schemes in a very unconventional style. But Pekka, feel free to express yourself about that.
Well, yeah, when thinking about the future, as you nicely put it, that Africa is not Africa, what was it 20 years ago, but now what's going on and what needs to happen in coming couple of years. I take an example of 5G and digital infrastructure. So it will be the case that in many and probably in the future in all the cities, digital infrastructure is based on 5G, and that is something what is linking cities and cities' role also as an innovation platform, again kind of on the surface, and there you need large companies to first of all deploy that digital infrastructure. But what happens after that? What kind of smart energy solutions will be deployed, because the energy or let's say that energy business will be totally different in the future when the producers, I mean consumers are producers and so forth. Smart traffic, you need to have totally new solutions, and they will happen, that kind of solutions will happen also in Africa, like it happens in Europe or in China and so forth. So that is linking actually much better cities in different markets as a platform together. And what if those cities will also being kind of the platforms for international company, kind of reciprocal type of way that Nigerian company can come to, you know, some city in Espoo testing their solutions related to certain solutions on top of this digital infrastructure and vice versa. Mm-hmm. So that might be somehow kind of the new way of linking and having innovation partnerships that which are based not only, you know, governmental kind of agreements, but they might be city to city. Yeah. But it's possible that there are actors like we as Business Finland that we kind of facilitate that to happen, or your kind of organizations, facilitate that kind of connection and start to do things and tying us together. So.
I just want to make a comment here, very interestingly enough, that open innovation is something that we found to really work really well. We are working extensively with large corporates, Indian, multinational as well as European in India, who are very, very serious about scouting for technology globally to solve very, very specific problems. I'll give you one example. You know, the utility sector in India, there's a lot of power theft. I mean, we lose about 40 to 50% of our energy through just theft. And now we have, you know, companies that offer utility solutions really defining what the problem is and putting out global innovation scouting calls to scout for the best of the best technologies from around the world. So that, having said that, now, in fact, we are looking at city governments in India, partnering with corporates in India to identify the problems and challenges, you know, that they're facing, maybe in waste management or digital infrastructure or, you know, traffic management, etc., and put those kind of challenges out at a more global level. So you let Indian startups, SMEs, as well as global startups and SMEs really apply and create consortiums and work together to really find business opportunities as well as solve problems. So,
yeah, and you know that there are already, you know, areas, as you mentioned, for example, waste to energy, waste to value type of thing. Circular economy opens up totally new kind of avenues in that front, and that might need sometimes some kind of stimulation, encouragement in terms of innovation funding maybe, and that kind of calls we have had tens of years between bilateral ways, but that might change really in this kind of challenge-driven, mission-driven type of things, and they are much more precise, and that means that companies are also much more interested, and then the funding models have to be somehow in a manner that if the larger company, you mentioned Wärtsilä or Nokia or some companies, that if they get a, for example, grant from us, we require collaboration with smaller companies. That is always as a kind of condition. So we never fund like larger companies just for large companies, but the spillover effect is so important. And then this international collaboration we also require in that kind of solutions.
Thank you. I keep the word challenge, and I would like to ask if anybody has a challenging question to any of the panelists. Is there Mike? Mike, please, here, the gentleman here. We have...
Thank you. Tim Softley, University of Birmingham. I think I just wanted to pick up some points that Bosan made. I think what you're suggesting is that you can have an innovation ecosystem in Nigeria without having a strong research base by just building on the knowledge that's out there and linking to Europe and so on. I mean, I think that's an interesting model, but I just wonder whether that's a long-term sustainable one. It might help you to get started, but it's not, I'm not sure that it's a long-term one for the future. And maybe you have to think more about, you know, the flow of the benefits of innovation back into research, if that's going to work.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, but there's anecdotes to actually show that it's very sustainable. Because I think countries like Nigeria, if we wait to build a solid national innovation system, we're never going to catch up. And if you look at the trajectory that technology is taking, it's constantly evolving. So pouring money into certain things and saying we need to build a research capacity is probably not going to be the solution. And the example I'll give you, when I went back about 10 years ago about 8 years ago to start my organization, I was working in the UK. Nokia was quite strong in Africa. Nokia actually had a research center in Africa. And that was why when the Nokia mobile phones were going down globally, it was still selling heavily in Africa. because the understanding of Africa was embedded in the production of the solution that they were selling. But the other thing they did alongside the likes of Google and Facebook was they poured a lot of money into actually training young people to become software engineers. And that was only based on the fact that they were selling to that market. Today, Nigeria supplies tons of software engineers all over the world. You know, companies in Netherlands, Booking.com, which is one of the most successful technology companies in Europe today, startup, hires a lot of people from Nigeria. In Finland, I've lost probably 10 people from my team to companies in Finland. That's a development that is already happening. So what you get alongside collaborating with external research and knowledge is that as you transfer that knowledge, as you apply that knowledge, you find that there's also transfer of knowledge that comes with it. And that begins to build, which is why I came up with the theory of the distributed innovation system, which is something I'm still thinking about. But I think Africa can leverage distributed innovation system because innovation today is distributed anyways. You mentioned how innovation in Finland is not based for the Finnish market. It's global. So if a company in the UK is going to serve, especially with what is coming, a company in the UK is going to be looking at the whole world as the market. And if you're going to produce anything today, you need to have a thorough understanding of the countries you're selling into. And as part of having that understanding means you're setting up a team like Booking.com now has a team in Nigeria, not just in Netherlands. And with that will come with a lot of knowledge transfer. And what that would do is force us in Nigeria or several other African countries to also begin to build the pool of knowledge and start to invest in research. Because I think the difficult leapfrog is to get countries that traditionally don't do a lot of research, don't invest in research, to automatically pour a lot of resources into it. It's going to be very difficult. But when you show them evidence that it's possible, you will see that the traction will come and there will be change.
Thank you, Bojan. Sorry to press you, but I am myself pressed by the organizer. We have been a bit limiting the control of the timetable. I'm sorry, I have to stop the session now. I've made a mistake in the timing. Sorry for the pending questions. I suppose you can meet these gentlemen at the reception after all. And before closing, may I ask you to thank and congratulate the panelists for their participation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Nice meeting you. Yeah.
thank you. We've solved the volume issue. So, we enter the final block of this afternoon's program, and today has been, well, from my personal perspective, a very interesting and eclectic set of discussions. We've talked a lot about the present, right, and some of the historical traces of international partnerships and innovation platforms and some of the best practice that's going on today. The closing session is looking a little more into the future. And for that, we have invited two different sets of perspectives. In about 15 minutes, we'll have our closing panel on what non-EU countries expect, hope, aspire to get from Horizon Europe, and the framework programs and other instruments to come to support research and innovation across borders. But before we do that, we've invited a perspective from a little close to home from Professor Joël Mézot, who is the new president of ETH Zurich. Professor Mézot, we're delighted that you managed to fit us into your schedule, given that you're only 5 weeks into the new job. But we've invited Professor Mézot to give some thoughts on how we can build a more sustainable European research and innovation area, what that also implies for Europe in a global context, and the future of research and innovations programs. So, Monsieur Mézot, we've heard a lot about cohesion and connectivity and partnerships today. Given that you're a professor in the dynamics of strongly correlated materials, I think you're going to have something very interesting to share with us. So the floor is yours, sir. Thank you very much for joining us.
There is no sound. You're going a little bit too fast.
Can you hear me now?
No.
And now? Good. Okay, I can speak slow, not so loud. So I understand we are in a hurry, so I will try not to be too long. What I wanted to say, I'm not going to speak as a solid-state physicist. I will speak as the president of ETH and former director of the Paul Scherrer Institute, which is one of the large-scale institute in Switzerland. First, I wanted to thank you for inviting a Swiss to speak about Beyond Horizon. I think it's an interesting situation for us. Let me start by making a very general statement, which is about the importance of science in conditions where international tensions are increasing, which I think is a situation that we are in now. And science can be a mediator, can bolster dialogue in such times. And I just want to remember of two examples of the past. One is the creation of Cern just after the Second World War. One of the ideas was to reconcile people. And the other one is maybe not so well known, but Europe has been essential in establishing the Sesame initiative in Middle East. This is a synchrotron where most partners of the region are participating. So science can provide a platform for new forms of interactions and resolutions in times of political sensitive issues. That's a very general statement. I think it's good to always remember these interesting history points. So Switzerland in itself has a great interest in having a free and unconstrained knowledge exchange and knowledge transfer in Europe and throughout the world. You know, we have a very export-driven, knowledge-based economy. For example, 3.4% of our GDP is invested in R&D, which is one of the highest number in OECD countries. And the economic ties with Europe are essential for Switzerland. 70% of our import is coming from Europe, and 50% of our export is going
to Europe, just to set the scene why Switzerland has to have very important ties with Europe. Research and development is essential for Switzerland. And I just want to give a few examples through the spin-offs that have been created in Switzerland. The ETH domain, for which ETH Zurich is one of the members together with EPFL, EMPA, and the Paul Scherrer Institute. Those are the four entities that are creating most spin-offs. This is essential. Last year, altogether, we have created about 50 spin-offs for a population of 8 million people, and just within the ETH domain, which is a very large, very good success. And this is very often in collaboration with programs of Horizon 2020. And I want to show you a few examples of this in the future. But now I want to structure my talk in 3 parts. First, Switzerland is part of Europe. This is important. Switzerland is committed to transnational, continental exchanges, and as this is also contributing to Europe's prosperity. Second point, I want to address shortly artificial intelligence and the challenge that is ahead of us, especially for Europe. And finally, I will go to beyond Horizon 2020 and some ideas and what are the main points that I see for this. So as the president of ETH, as a researcher working in Switzerland, as past director of the Paul Scherrer Institute, it's clear for me that Switzerland has to be part of Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe. As you know, the difficulty is that Switzerland is not part of EU, and as such, we need to renegotiate every certain years the contract with Europe. But I'm convinced from all the talks that we had today with various persons from Europe and with the Swiss Federal Council in Switzerland that we will find a good solution to be associated with Horizon Europe right from the start. Here on this graph, what you see is that the number of contact points that exist for ETH worldwide, those are about 9,000, of which close to 5,000 are in Europe. That shows the importance of Europe for Switzerland. Even if we are really international, our main partner is Europe, and this is very important to repeat it regularly. What is maybe even more interesting, we are working with about 500 companies in EU, just for the ETH alone, and I'm sure for EPFL and EMPA, those are similar numbers. So this set a little bit the importance of Europe for Switzerland. I want to show you here a few, I mentioned spin-offs. I want to show you here, there is another important factor in Europe, and that was mentioned today several times. This is the role played by large-scale infrastructures and the access of these infrastructures to the researchers in Europe. You can see here that there are about 30 such infrastructures in Europe, 6 of which are in Switzerland. And actually, Switzerland is member of all the international research infrastructures of Europe, be it ESA, be it the European XFEL, ESS in Lund, or ESRF in Grenoble. So we are a very reliable partner. And 6 of these institutions are in Switzerland, and we are open, completely open to the use of these facilities to the European researchers. Here you can see the numbers. About 40% of the use of Switzerland large-scale facilities, the neutron source, the synchrotron, the free electron laser, is by European researchers. 40%. This is a very, very high level, and this is only on merit-based access. And I think this is the right way to go if we want to ensure excellence. The other example is a spin-off that has been created. Now I want to mention two other examples. That is, there is something going wrong with the slides. Okay. So two important examples where we are working with European colleagues. This is in the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health, which is a network for database and medical data that serves as basis for future drug development. In Europe, the national hubs are connected via a program called Elixir, and this is a distributed infrastructure. Elixir's main unit in Switzerland is called Swiss Institute for Bioinformatics, which consists of numerous research groups, many of them at EPFL and at ETH in Zurich. They were fully involved in the Horizon 2020 program. Another important field that is important to mention is the energy sector. There have been proposals that Switzerland should work with colleagues in Asia or in United States. But think about the grid stability in Europe. This has to be solved with our partners in Europe, in France, in Germany, and in Italy, because and Switzerland is an important partner in that. There is here an important program called Excel, where the ETH Zurich and various companies developed some fast electronics that can, based on new silicon technology, to stabilize the grid. So very important initiative. So main message for this first part, Switzerland is part of the European research innovation area, and we hope that it will remain like this in the future. Allow me to make a small departure to artificial intelligence. So, which is a little bit my field also on the material side. So you know that many fundamental ideas, fundamental technologies are developed in Europe. But if you look at where are the main players, they are in Asia and they are in the United States, without naming big companies. So there is, and we have seen this many times, there is a famous example, the photovoltaic was invented in Switzerland, in Neuchâtel, and now we see who are the big players in this game. So we shouldn't miss this opportunity, and I believe there is still an opportunity with Horizon Europe that we catch up, but this has to go only if we go together, and we will have a second chance. This requires funding, access to data, and above all, mutual trust between the different partners. Europe has the potential to promote safe and ethical development of artificial intelligence. We have a place to play in this important development. I just want to mention a few ventures, successful ventures, that benefited from SME vehicles support from EU research programs. This company, Best Smile from EPFL, is a spin-off that is aiming at providing the first matching, dispatching, and routing platform for the operation of optimization of autonomous vehicles, fleets. Until 2025, we are expecting about 20 million in Europe such AV vehicles. And this was supported by a fantastic project called CATS. This is just one example how this research is going. I want to show you another example, which is also very timely important, and this is a spin-off Vingtra. This is the world-leading vertical takeoff and landing drone producer. This was also supported by EU funding, and this drone find applications that range from surveying and mining to wildlife monitoring. Currently, this spin-off has engaged contracts with 30 of the biggest surveying equipment dealers around the globe. So you see, this is an idea that started from Switzerland, that expanded to Europe, thanks to the funding in Europe, and is now exporting worldwide. This is the kind of examples that we want to see. Now, again, small departure, I want to mention the importance of basic research for all this development. It was said many times. Actually, at the WEF in Davos 2 weeks ago, several important CEOs of big companies like Microsoft or the pharma industry, Roche, mentioned that universities and research centers should focus on basic research. This is where we get our blood for new ideas from. And I remember the debate that there was just before, and I think our roads are very clear here. Just a number, there was a survey of the ETH domain about the kind of patents that we have. 30% of our patents are in the 10% high world-class patent class, which is very good for the future. It means that many of these these patents will be involved in some development in the future. And most of these patents come from basic research. And I think this is an asset that we have in Switzerland and for Europe to have this development. So I'm convinced that fundamental research is there to lay the foundation for tomorrow's technology. And we should repeat this message again and again. So this is why the third pillar of Horizon Europe for open innovation is essential also for associated countries and vital for the success of EU. Now, let me come to the last part of my talk. I hope I'm okay with the time. I'm almost finished. What does European research community need in the future from the Swiss point of view? I see 5 key points that we need to consider. First, to agree on missions, and that was already mentioned today, missions of relevant topics, and that can be matched to the UN Sustainable Development Goals with investor-driven and science-led governance structures. Second, state-of-the-art big research infrastructures, but with purely merit-based access. Third, strong promotion of basic research via the ERC Council, so I mentioned that. Fourth, strong promotion of proof of concept and science-based innovation, supporting spin-offs and formulating collaborations with industry. That was the main topic of today's sessions. And finally, we shouldn't forget, at the end, all depends on the quality of the people that we are training. So we need high-quality education support for students, PhDs, and researchers via Horizon Europe. So, just to finish, this ambitious plan requires, and I hope you will agree with me, the full association of all countries, including Switzerland, of course, but also UK, whatever happens with UK, with Horizon Europe. The EU success as a world leader in economic competitiveness and its capacity for innovation will be the result of an advanced and knowledge-based economy. Such an economy relies upon a close cooperation between academic research and private sector, and you will hear more about this in the next debate. And for this, all of Europe is needed. Thank you for your attention.
And looking ahead to the future, so we move very quickly into our final session. So I'm very honored to invite 5 guests to come up and join us. You have your nameplates here on the table to discuss what non-EU countries want from Horizon Europe and some of the dimensions that have been touched on already, but some that perhaps have not been. So we just wait for our final panelist to join us. And here he comes. But anyway, we shall start with the introductions of our speakers. So, we're very pleased to have Philippe Tanguy, the president of École Polytechnique de Montréal, formerly of Total. Thank you for coming all the way from Canada to be with us. Konstantinos Glinos, who's the head of unit for international cooperation strategy at DG Research. At the European Commission, Joanna Newman, Chief Executive and Secretary General. I've never been very clear on what the difference is between the two, but the Association of Commonwealth Universities, one of the world's largest platforms of inter-university collaboration and partnership. We have Dan du Toit, Deputy Director General of the South African Department of Science and Technology, and very familiar face to many of you here, given your long tenure in Brussels, going all the way back to FP4, I think you said, in our call. And last but by no means least, Alessandro Corioni, who's Vice President for Research at IBM Europe and Director of IBM's Research Lab in Zurich. So, I'm going to start with a question, and I'm going to end with the same question, but there's a little tweak. Kostas, you only get to answer at the end. Okay, so the opening question to you all is, are you happy? Are you happy with what the European Commission currently has on the table regarding Horizon Europe, the future instruments, the priorities, etc., for the next research and innovation program? And then Kostas, at the end, we're going to ask you if you're happy with the answers. Okay? So let's start with a continuation of the Swiss perspective and an industry view. Alessandro, I mean, IBM has contributed hugely to the European scientific landscape over the years. How does it look to you?
Look, is it working? I don't think so. Yes? Okay. So, to answer your question, I do think that the European Horizon 2020 programs allowed us, as a research institution in Switzerland, to really amplify our impact from an industrial viewpoint, but also the impact to the community. We have to remember that this is always two sides, two ways. And during Horizon 2020, we were also able, thanks to this instrument, to enhance strongly our networks. So only from my Zurich lab, I am collaborating with more than 500 different institutions in Europe. And this, of course, is a huge enrichment to us. For the one of you that knows McAuliffe law about network, right? When you interact with networks, okay, the value that you create is not proportional of the size of the network connection, but to the square of the network connection, right? So this union gave us much, much, much more, but at the same time allowed us to give back to Europe, to the European research institution, our global network of research. So it's been very, 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 very functional, and allow us also to attract or avoid that some of the best talents that we have in Europe would leave the continent. We went from having a few nationalities working for the lab to more than 50. That is a huge value that the previous program was able to create. The formation of the new Horizon Europe, I do think that the Commission has been able to correct some of the major problems that there were in the program. For example, complexity, too much time writing proposals, judge a proposal, and so on and so forth for the returns, okay. Was able to add this notion of the mission, that in my opinion is very positive, because again, we are speaking about research, and we should arrive to a point in which we don't have to justify to the society why we are doing basic research. Yeah? Basic research should be like the same type of rights, like freedom or freedom of thinking, movements, and so on and so forth, because that is what we want, right? And I think that that has been a big step forward. So now all the discussion on the role of associated party, I do think that I already answered. I do hope that we will arrive to a situation where, from a political viewpoint, this value that we create from this network, that again is not only like the investment, but it's the power of two, is understood and that the New Horizon network will allow associated countries like Switzerland, UK, Israel to participate, still participate in the same way.
Well, I think the question of where we go with Brexit is another matter altogether, and we'll touch on it later, but we're not going to obsess about it because, well, frankly, there's not enough clarification for us to have a proper discussion. But one very quick additional question, Alessandro. Perhaps the Swiss context is unique given the prioritization of industrial research, technological developments, and so forth, but do you as industry have a hard time getting political attention to these issues? Because if we look at the UK context or elsewhere, it can be a lot harder.
Look, I am responsible for IBM research in Europe. Our major installations are in Switzerland, 60 years, Dublin, and then UK. So one country that was an associated partner, one that probably will become, and one that is a EU country, right? I do think that we need and we are spending time again to relay the message that I was telling you before of the importance from both sides to have these things done right. And you know, there is this misconception sometimes when we speak about Europe first, okay? I do think that that is important, but it is very important that we do Europe first, especially as Joel was saying before, when we transfer the ideas and the knowledge that is created by the high-end research to value. And in order to do that, you know, that is not a question of being associated partner or not, is to create the condition to have an ecosystem that facilitate this transfer. So that is, in my opinion, where politicians have to put more weight if they want to make a difference. And instead, to try to have this level that is a top level as much synergistic as possible for the reason that I told you before, right? And not concentrate to confine this level, because if you confine the research level, you cut drastically the ideas, the new step forward that you have in science, and then, you know, also the value that you can bringing down innovation to the market become much smaller.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. Now, Dan, do these messages resonate, or what kind of conversations have you been having in South Africa about Horizon Europe and the future?
Well, let me start by answering your question and doing that perhaps with a tongue-in-cheek comment, but it will serve to illustrate a point I want to make. It's not for South Africa to be happy or not to be happy with what the European Commission proposes for Horizon Europe. It's a European program funded by European taxpayers' money and rightly informed by European objectives. And we're not a European country, and we have no ambition to be a European country. All of that said, and that shouldn't be, this comment should not be heard in a negative context. We have a long, historic, valued relationship with the European Commission in research. We've been participating in the framework program since the 4th framework program. When our country became a democracy, the participation in the framework programs was exceptionally valuable, allowing the young South Africa to integrate global research. But that relationship, which we've carefully constructed over the years, and now again is evidence of very successful participation in Horizon 2020, is based on the values of co-ownership and co-responsibility. And speaking to our friends in Europe as partners, where we jointly define the agenda, where we want to collaborate, but being respectful of each other's national programs and instruments. You spoke about Europe First. We have absolutely no problem with European programs speaking about Europe First, because quite frankly, the programs I'm responsible for in my country is about South Africa First. But what we do have in Europe is a partner whom we can talk to and achieve that values which underpins, which all good collaboration is all about, and that is shared interest and the win-win type of situation. So to answer your question, there's nothing in the proposal for Horizon Europe which specifically concerns us. What we look forward to is to keep going the dialogue, and which we've always enjoyed with our partners in Europe, is to continue to construct this relationship. The world is changing, the world is evolving. It's not the same discussion we've had at the start of FP7, at the start that we have had with Horizon 2020. But at this stage, there's no specific reason for us to be concerned, and we look forward to follow with interest how the discussions will evolve in Brussels over the coming months.
Indeed. Well, thank you for that candor, and it's okay, tongue-in-cheek is always good. We're perfectly happy with that. Now, Joanna, in some ways it's a bit of a difficult question for you. You have almost 550 members worldwide in 50-plus countries. So, I mean, the array of opinions or attitudes towards Europe and the framework programs must vary. But within ACU, how's this being received at the moment? Are there concerns? Are there areas?
I'm not sure how to answer this. I'm not sure whether I'm happy or unhappy, particularly speaking for 535 or for institutions in very different situations, from developing emerging economies to developed economies, from landlocked countries to fragile island states. One of the things that I think unites us is the fact that we are an international organization, and so Europe First doesn't chime well, or South Africa First for that matter, because we recognize the interdependence of countries upon each other. So I think that is one of the first principles that also underpins the Commonwealth. We are underpinned by a charter that speaks for autonomy, equality, freedom of movement, as well as freedom of rights. So that would be the first comment I would make. And I think, am I happy or unhappy? With the framework programs, yes, we're happy that they exist, and we think they're an extremely good mechanism, and they have extremely good tools to enable collaboration. Am I happy with the general situation? Of course not. 76% gross tertiary enrollment in North America and Europe, 8% in sub-Saharan Africa, where you have a largest youth population. Now, am I happy with the excellence? No, I'm not, because actually it cuts out and excludes something like 90% of our members who are in lower middle income countries. Are they able to perform and collaborate? Of course they are. Are the young people in many of the countries where, for example, in Pakistan, 2% have access to universities? Should more have access? Of course they should. Would research be better? Of course it would. If you looked at the Elsevier figures earlier on today, you saw there was some quite interesting statistics. Well, China is actually peaked over America in terms of maths, I think, and some of the physical sciences. So that's also good news in the sense that there are more universities in the world than ever before doing more research, which is great. But we still have a large... We still have a long way to go before we have any equity and access to research and education. And although Horizon 2020 and Framework Programme 9 will be also rightly concerned with basic research and excellence, it has always, right from its beginnings, European funding, been also concerned with capacity building. And so we would like to see, for example, more emphasis on how you build capacity at the same time as funding research. What mechanisms? Are they split-site PhDs? Is it more of Erasmus Mundi? Is it shorter-term programs? What are the ways that one can actually help facilitate those sorts of partnerships that will result in a more equal playing field? I have two examples just to end on. One is Namibia, a newish country, really. UNAM is an amazing university there with fantastic students and really ambitious staff, half of whom had been in prison and fought for independence. They need help and they need collaboration, but they're also doing great research, for example, with a few university partnerships which have been in there for the long term. And they've been in there for the long term because of capacity building type programs which convert the early kinds of relationships that are really about capacity building exchanges to actually research programs, because the PhD students and the faculty have met for long enough to create meaningful research. The other example to give is that earlier today we were talking about linking research to impact and linking research to the Sustainable Development Goals. The ACU is working with other university networks to represent what universities and higher education is doing in sustainable development at the UN to push the case for more funding for higher education, for example. But there is a tension, I think, that Europe and Horizon 2020 encourages as much as individual institutions do between high citation impact research and research for impact. So, for example, someone from Tsinghua, a very good university, was talking about, should I be doing the applied research that is making a huge difference in agricultural villages in China? It's an amazing impact, but it's not going to get me the citations that was going to give me my professorship as I go on up the... So, you know, there is something else which needs to be addressed, I think, in framework programs on a European level to support researchers to do both kinds of research.
Okay, great, thank you. Now, Philippe, I'm going to come to you in a minute, but I'm just going to actually turn to Kostas first. Any initial thoughts, Kostas, on this question of capacity building and talent? We'll come to this also in the context of Canada, because it's something that Philippe and I talked about before the conference. But first thoughts about an institutional response.
You asked me if I was happy with the replies.
No,
I think
only at the end.
happy.
Only at the end. No, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Look, the framework program makes a unique proposal, unique proposition. I mean, there's no other place in the world where you can find this. It's a program that's European, funded by the European taxpayer, but through which you can collaborate with the entire world. It's really a unique thing. I mean, it doesn't exist anywhere else. So, I mean, it's very difficult to be unhappy. Now, if you go into the details, also there it's very difficult because it's, as said this morning, it's more continuity than discontinuity or disruption. So have the same openness to the world, improved a little bit or a lot regarding the association part, because in the association we have now far greater flexibility, both in the type of countries that we can associate, now it's very open, as well as whether you associate to the whole thing or to a more limited part of the program, which also is great for a number of countries. That's why we're already seeing a significant interest, of course, it's very initial interest at this moment, from a number of countries that have not been our partners in the past. So it is, I think, really a unique thing. And it is now with the associations, a new chapter opens. We'll see what it gives. I cannot be neither pessimistic nor optimistic for the time being. As Jean-Éric Paquet said this morning, we need the proposals of the Commission to be adopted. And this will be, it will take quite a few more months. And then we'll start discussing. The other thing that I wanted to remind is the basis on, through which we engage, and that's why this discussion, Europe first or not, is not necessarily very relevant, because it implies that somebody will get the short end of the stick, whereas here we're talking about positive sum games, we're talking about mutual benefit, identifying the cases where everybody has to benefit, and therefore, you know, Europe first or whoever first implies that somebody will lose out. The basis on which we engage is mutual benefit, first of all, so we do recognize that everybody has to benefit. It's not only Europe that has to benefit. It is EU interest, definitely. It's European taxpayers' money, so it has to be in the EU interest. And it is making true our commitments, our global commitments. So when we say that we'll support research about climate or will support whatever the international commitments of the EU are, then the research program also has to contribute to making these commitments, to realize these commitments.
Well, that's, I think, a link into something that we've discussed with Philippe. I mean, obviously, Canada, the new Canada-Europe relationship has come up in a number of conversations today, Philippe. We talked about whether there might be alignments of interest, strategic interest, in the wider context of associated and third parties countries transferring knowledge into Europe as well as benefiting directly from engagement with different parts of the framework programs or the research platform. So from the presidency of one of Canada's leading research-intensive universities, where do you see the real win-win in this new environment? Are you happy with Horizon Europe and what you think it offers if the politics around the Canada-EU relationship all work out?
Well, yes, I'm not a national policy maker, so I can talk as a university president. Well, it's very clear that looking back at Horizon 2020, we had actually the opportunity of participating. It was not straightforward. It was a chore. So yes, if we can get an easier access with Horizon Europe, it's going to be nice. In fact, I want to, just jump on what my colleague has said. We have plenty of joint issues, from very general one, like climate change, which is very global, to smart cities, to security, and I have two in mind, food, which is one of the new ones in Europe again, and cybersecurity, which is a real one, as we have mentioned this morning and this afternoon with AI. We have an educated population as well on both sides with expectations, and we have to fulfill them. So in fact, there are plenty of things. We have a very strong research ecosystem in Canada. We have very good research agencies as well. So that's, in fact, a mature country. The geopolitics have changed a little, and I'm sure you appreciate. It's a little bit more difficult now to collaborate with our southern neighbor. And we have now a free trade agreement with Europe. So maybe instead of playing the North-South game, we may play better the West-East or East-West game. Okay, so that gives opportunities. But very clearly, you know, if we want this to work, everybody has to win. So yes, the funding issues has to be resolved, and I understand that. But it's more than that, you know. At least for us, what is attractive is the kind of unique programs that Europe have created around clusters, around, okay, I spent, before joining back Polytechnic Montreal, I spent 9 years in Europe, so I know Horizon 2020 very well. And I was a co-founder of one of the first KIC, which is energy. And so for 7 years, sorry, I was a vice chairman of the board. So we really grew, energy to something that was really an idea, to something which is achieved to be extremely successful. And what was nice about it, and does not exist in Canada, is where you have the same time government, business, university, and public research as it exists in Europe on the same table with the same amount of power. And this is very interesting. And I'm sure that at Polytechnic, but in general with my Canadian colleagues, there should be an appetite for those type of models. So maybe participating to EIT program could be an option, but there is maybe much more than that. And so, you know, we have first-class ecosystems in Canada. There are ecosystems that we don't have that exist in Europe. Plenty of things to share.
Fantastic. So I'm going to come back to an earlier point in a slightly different context, which is around excellence and people in research. And it also touches on what you mentioned, Joanna, regarding talent mobility and capacity building, because this is perhaps just a personal view, but there seems to be a bit of a paradox that we talk about open to the world and commitments to international partnerships and global science, and, if you like, the rising tide floats all boats. And yet we have programs such as the ERC, which seek to bring the best talent in the world to Europe under certain terms and conditions. Now, is there a possibility of a brain drain? I mean, are there unintended consequences of using Horizon Europe as sort of the convening point for the best in the world, but how do we ensure that the rest of the world benefits from their best and brightest coming here? Maybe Dan, you want to start with this?
Certainly. You know, I think sometimes in Europe you should be less defensive and less making excuses. The way science works, science knows no borders, scientists travel. And certainly in South Africa, we have grappled with the phenomenon which is brain drain. And till the day we sort of stopped saying, we're going to stop blaming everyone else for our researchers leaving. Why are they leaving? What are we doing to create an attractive environment for South African researchers to stay where they should be, and also to get researchers to come from elsewhere in the world to South Africa? I mean, someone made a comment earlier. I disagree. I think the vibrant about the African innovation ecosystem, without Africa's own in research capacities, including basic research capacities, we are not going to achieve the vision of science and technology transforming our continent. So, of course, I think the possibility that scientists will go where they find attractive opportunities to further their careers, including funding opportunities, that is real. And if opportunities offer in Europe for scientists to do that, yes, perhaps some of them will leave the countries of origin, and perhaps sometimes they will come back. But you should see this as part of an holistic partnership. Now, clearly, the European Research Council rightfully heralded it as a success story. He has as the goal to get the best brains to Europe, and I think that's fine. I understand why Europe is doing that. So what we have done is, instead of complaining about it, we have negotiated a very fruitful partnership with the ERC to have some of our best young scientists spend times with ERC advanced grants holders. And we've also copied it. So we've got a much more modest version of an ERC scheme in South Africa. It's called the South African Research Chairs Initiative, based on the models of our Canadian friends. And we've actually attracted some Canadian researchers now in astronomy to come and work in South Africa because we have generous money for astronomy. So I think it goes back to the point I've said. It's all about discussion and about partnership, and completely agreed, achieving the win-win. But we cannot, I think we will not be honest with ourselves if we deny that in the science business world there's an element of competition. And we have to speak about it openly and frankly. And that's why I say, with all respect and love to my friends in Europe, sometimes you're too defensive and sometimes just try to be too nice. We don't mind. We can talk, because those are, someone said to me earlier today about interests. Well, it's in X's own interests. I mean, quite frankly, we only want to work with people who have interests, because then you know they're committed. And it's about putting everyone's interests on the table and then finding a partnership which works.
I do think that, as he was saying, there is this part of positive and good competition that would help everybody. So the fact that Europe has a ERC as an instrument, yes, we brought in good people, push also other countries, other places to try to do the same, and good people, again, and good scientists, people that can make a difference, wants to go where there are other good scientists, again, the network type of interaction, and in places where they can make a difference. So I do think that starting to have, a positive, honest competition around this is only beneficial for everybody.
Joanna, is anything you'd like to add to that?
I'm cogitating, I'm not sure, because I think you're right that everyone has to have you have to have your interests on the table, but at the same time, if you don't have mechanisms or frameworks that encourage the building up, for example, of PhD capacity in countries that have very few PhDs, you will continually have a brain drain because you don't have the capacity in country to keep and retain your best talent. So building up schemes which help, for example, with split-site PhDs, so that the PhD student and the universities benefit, and then you have somewhere for them to go back to. Equally, the GCRF, which is UK funding, now has a partnership stream, which means that to get this funding, you have to give back to one of the institutions that you're working with in a developing context. That can only be good in a sustainable way for the future. So I agree that there's nothing wrong with competition, there's nothing wrong with mobility, and there's nothing wrong with attracting best talent. But I would also like to see the mechanisms, the learning baked in to collaboration that then sees that it's going to be just as attractive to go back to an institution after a number of years as it is to move to Europe and stay there.
So Kostas, what can we do about this? I mean, there must be aspects in the Commission's toolbox that can strengthen some of these, or at least address these concerns and strengthen the current approaches.
Several speakers said this morning also that excellence has to remain the basis of the European research programs. And I think scientific excellence will remain the basis of Horizon Europe. And I think everybody will agree that there is no excellence without competition. So you do need competition. There is no question about it. A technical issue about ERC that you said earlier, the ERC requires, if I'm not mistaken, that These primary investigators spend 50% of the time in the EU institution, not 100% of their time. Yeah. So we have cases where people, move to Europe partly part-time to do the project while retaining their position. Brain drain, yes, it's a major issue for many countries. On the other hand, a colleague showed this graph earlier on, which was about the stayers, the incomers, the outgoers, and so on. I don't remember who showed it, but I have seen these graphs again and again, also by the OECD, and it is very clear that scientific quality of a particular researcher correlates extremely strongly with whether he has moved from his home country or not. So people that move over to other countries and circulate, yeah, their quality is on average significantly better than others that have never left their country. So brain drain, brain gain, but brain circulation, many people talk about. Brain circulation means you have brain drain and brain gain. So some people come in, some others go out. This is the situation for many countries. Some countries, big countries like China, have reversed completely within a decade that. So for the last, I think, 2 years, China has more incoming scientists nowadays than outgoing, whereas it was brain drained, for decades. So it shows that what Dan was saying is absolutely possible. It's absolutely possible to make a strong science basis, to have even basic research in your country, but you do need to have brain circulation. So in the beginning, people, even in a developing nation, people will need to go out for eventually to come in, and while they're out, to continue cooperating with scientists in their home country in order to raise the quality there. And this is what happens in reality. There have been several studies, also again from the OECD, from the World Bank and so on, showing that sudden brain drain, where all of a sudden, because of a crisis, everybody leaves, is a big shock for the country, it's bad. But brain drain in the sense that progressively people leave, but then eventually some of them, a decade later, come back, and while they're away, cooperate, which is the standard case, it's actually helpful for the country.
So I'd like to just shift a little bit onto another topic that's had quite a lot of discussion earlier today, which is around global challenges. The constant references to the need for international collaboration if we find solutions to the highly complex issues threatening different parts of our way of life. The UN SDGs are the most visible framework around this. So I guess my question is, does Horizon Europe do enough to facilitate the exchange of knowledge and scientific and technological excellence between Europe and other parts of the world, so that we actually start connecting the dots in pursuit of solutions to global challenges? Right? So we have the clusters, we have the global challenges built into the Horizon Europe program, but from a non-EU perspective, is it doing enough to pool the knowledge and the assets and the resource and the scientific excellence that will lead us towards more realistic solutions and better outcomes? Maybe Philippe, you want to start?
Well, for Horizon Europe, it's difficult to know so far because we have no real clue about what it will be. But back to mobility, I mean, we are not suffering from ERC competition, I can tell you, not at all, okay? Canada remains very attractive. In fact, you know the American dream, it's in Canada now, it's no longer in the US. You can raise a family, the country is safe, you can make a good living, and you can develop yourself. That was the American dream, now it's in Canada. So in fact, yes, we are losing professors to Europe. I have 2 colleagues that left, one to China, one to Europe just in the last month, but we are also gaining others from the US and from Europe. So I believe within Horizon Europe, we may see those type of things happening. It's possible, but okay, I don't think it's a real danger, it's a real threat. It's just healthy, as long as it's a zero, not net-sum game.
In your question whether Horizon Europe does enough, it reminds me of discussions we've had on whether it's the Millennium Development Goals or other challenges about earlier framework programs. And I think we often fall into the trap in a setting like this to see the framework program as the panacea for everything. It's just one instrument. It's a program as important, as unique, as valid as it is for research and innovation, but it's by no means the only instrument which Europe or the world is going to use to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So I think Horizon Europe should focus on what it's there for, its core mission, and does that well, and then have the positive linkages and synergies with other instruments. In the case of Europe, in the case of collaboration with other countries, the development cooperation instruments of DG DevCo have that type of alignment. But don't put all your hopes and unreasonable expectations on just one program.
Good point, well made.
And that's to speak of your points of capacity building. I agree with everything you said, but I don't think all of those things should be done by Horizon Europe.
I completely agree, and I also agree that the Sustainable Development Goals are an organizing principle.
Exactly.
They are a way of inspiring the next generation of school kids to actually get involved in their world and in their environment, as much as they are about, because, I mean, let's face it, 2030 is not very long, it's not very far away. Are we really going to reach all of those goals? At least the Sustainable Development Goals seem to have inspired people in a way the Millennium Development Goals were not nearly as famous. So, yes, there should be links to SDGs through the European framework programs, through individual institutions, through university associations like our own. But universities and research institutes do the research anyway. They are international in who they are, and they are, by their very nature, going to be involved in those global challenges, regardless of a UN Sustainable Development Goal framework or even a Horizon 2020 framework.
Yeah, they have to be inspirational. They don't have to be, constrained, because then, all the original ideas is gone. Yeah?
But then, of course, I guess one of the other key questions is what are going to be the enabling structures and platforms and processes and instruments that facilitate or encourage or increase the collaboration to try and find solutions. But anyway, thank you for these perspectives. We've got a few minutes left, literally a few minutes left, and I'd like to at least give the crowd the opportunity to raise, challenge, ask a question. Are there any hands? Yes, we have one here. Anybody else? We can take a couple of questions. Both on the same row, all the better.
Thank you. Patrick Cran from CKA. Actually, I'm very happy that Mr. Dutoit mentioned the other instruments. We're asking a lot of the framework program, and it's worth noting that the development cooperation funds 5 times more research than the framework program with third countries. What they lack, though, is a strategy, because they tend to fund in an ad hoc manner in response to requests from the third country partners. We have the neighborhood policy, and they finance interventions in universities and research centers. In Tunisia, for example, postdocs with the African Union, programs a bit like the framework program, but intended to encourage networking amongst African countries on problems such as sustainable development of agriculture. So I think there's really, the real question is, how do you draw the line between what the framework program can do and what the other programs are doing? And how can you coordinate this in a way that makes sense for the countries that are beneficiary countries? And I think that would be a really interesting thing to look at in one of the future meetings of science business.
Great question, thank you. Okay, we'll just pass the microphone along.
Present here, Jeant, and I just like to mention here the virtual connectivity among the continents, which is so important because the connectivity doesn't bring only the data, but it provides a virtual mobility. You have not to travel anymore to have a meeting with your colleagues. If you have the very good connections, you can make a common research, you can make a common art if you have the connectivity in the secure environment. And I think that Europe, quite a leader here to connect the European research institutes with 110 countries all over the world, I think that this is something simply has to not to be forgotten, that nowadays it's not about only EI, it's not only about the data transfer, but it's about the virtual mobility and have a brain circulation in this virtual arena. And I just wanted to mention that this new system, this connection which developed and supported by the Horizon Europe and other European programs through DG DEFCO, the development programs, DG NEAR, I think that it's a very important added value which shouldn't be forgotten. My question, however, is that to get an international cooperation, we need to get a very positive political agenda. And we have seen how the first of America First concept is filtering through the populist forces to the countries. So I think that it's very important that the science can somehow make the role model or speak up to say why it is so important, that the planet is important. We are all important. The Earth itself is the important. And this is what we have to find a solution together. And I think this is maybe the question to you.
So the question is, how can science better influence policy? Yeah. I guess, right? So, two very good questions. We have the separation between framework programs and other instruments, development perhaps in particular, and other research programs, and then influencing policy.
Sure. At a time where countries want to build walls, you are left with science and sports to play really the diplomatic game. So I fully agree with you. And we are living on one planet. So, thanks for this comment.
Okay, any thoughts from other panelists on these 2 points?
Very, very briefly, and permit me to score some brownie points of Kostas. I fully agree on the importance of, whether you call it e-infrastructure, of cyber infrastructure to enable international cooperation. And there the role of the European Union should really be acknowledged. If the GÉANT high-speed research network is extended today to Africa, and we have high-speed networks which connects African and European researchers, it's in a large part due to the efforts of European Commission, including personally to Kostas, a long time ago when we worked together on that. But I mean, your question you ask about science and policy, but I want to just, in a sense, slightly turn it. And the role of what people now refer to as science diplomacy. I mean, science has that inherent ability to bring people together. Across whether it's political or other artificial boundaries which divide us. And again, sounding like a praise singer for Europe, which I'm not. I think Europe has, in the proud and long history of the framework programs, a unique, an exceptional instrument which has allowed international cooperation and plays a very important part in bringing countries together. I mean, my own country, we don't agree everything with Europe at a political level. We often disagree in the UN Security Council. We have difficult discussions on trade. We don't even always agree at the COP climate change negotiations, but we always agree on science and technology. And when my president meets the presidents of the European Commission and the Council, and they have to have positive and good news to say to each other, often science and technology comes to the fore. And that then plays a very important part in helping to strengthen this relationship. But even though we not always agree, matters both to Europe and our country. And I really would appeal to my European friends not to continue to build on this very powerful and unique legacy they have.
Thank you. Joanna, do your members, we'll come to you in just a moment, Kostas, do your members see this as well, these messages that you hear, that the science diplomacy, the soft power of the EU to engage is helpful in strengthening the communities of practice of science and
Our
education?
members are universities. So universities have two core missions: to educate their students to become global citizens, which is in its essence antithetical to any building of walls, and to contribute to global science and technology and building societies. So in the sense that might answer it. I think in a more sort of tactical sense, there is something about EU programs communicating perhaps to partners the way that they can get involved. In some countries it's extremely clear and extremely well developed because there has been funding put specifically towards their institutions playing a role with Europe. In other countries I think there's still some bridge building to understand the mechanisms by which one can be involved, and actually as the The question said, you know, there are other mechanisms to get involved with the EU, and sometimes it's not, unless your institution has invested in a unit that engages with European funding, it will not know how to do so. And so there might be something in that too.
Very good. Kostas, we're going to hand the final word to you, and of course the question. Whether you're happy with what you've heard.
I mean, first to comment on what Patrick asked about where is the limits between development and research programs. There are no well-defined limits, but generally development funds, DevCo, funds are more for capacity building in particular countries or regions, whereas our funds, research funds, are actually for innovation, for doing research and innovation. Of course, the two can be extremely complementary. And there are many occasions in which we work with both. So my colleagues, we worked all together in order to ensure this complementarity, and this has happened, for example, in the case of GEAN and the international networks, where high-speed network in Southeast Asia, in Africa, in Latin America have been financed by development funds, but led by the researchers. So, and there are many other examples, not to make it too long. So visual connectivity is indeed very important there as well. And I'm very glad that science diplomacy was now mentioned at the end of the conference. There's no time to discuss it, of course, but even as a term, because we discussed about sustainable development goals, about excellence, about all the motivations for doing research together. This one was not discussed during the day, but at least it was mentioned at the end, the fact that science really offers a positive engagement agenda between different countries or different organizations, and this is a very important role that it can have. So to answer your first question, I don't have unfortunately much to say, because you have had a very difficult job. You had to find something where we disagree, so there can be some lively discussion, and we all violently agree, and you couldn't get any disagreement out of the session. Therefore, I can, yes, I think I'm particularly happy, of course, with the proposal of the Commission, and of course the response of our partners, long-standing partners. It is something that is not unexpected, because we have been talking to them, and we have our dialogues, we have our informal contacts, we are continuously cooperating, engaging with them. So we hope that this will be, the proposal to go forward will be the best solution for everybody involved, including the international partners.
Fantastic. Well, there's nothing better than to end proceedings on a very harmonious note. So I have a couple of quick messages of thanks. First of all, sort of wave into the ether and thank our online audience for having stayed with us throughout the afternoon. Again, to thank our sponsors, Elsevier, Zabala and ING for hosting us for the first time in this very, very well-matched colour scheme, I think everyone said. But thank you again for all of your generosity in welcoming us. And thank you for being with us. It's not the most ideal time of year, not the best travel conditions for coming to Brussels, but we very much appreciate you taking the time to join us. So, last word, thank you very much to the panel for this final set of discussions, and we invite you all to come and join us for a drink. Thank you, and good evening.